to Wells Fargo customers after it was discovered that the bank had opened accounts and collected fees in customers' names without their knowledge or consent. Again, live this morning here on C-SPAN 3, a look inside the Senate Banking Committee hearing room. We'll be hearing first from the CEO of Wells Fargo and then later on from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Director, Richard Cordray.
The committee will come to order. Today we will learn more about the events and the circumstances that led to the enforcement action against Wells Fargo by the Los Angeles City Attorney, the OCC, and the CFPB. But first today we will receive testimony from John Stumpf. He's Wells Fargo CEO and Chairman, who's with us today. Welcome, Mr. Stumpf. We will then hear from the Los Angeles City Attorney's Deputy Chief, whose office was the first to commence an action against Wells Fargo on this issue, and finally from the OCC and the CFPB. We look forward to hearing from both panels because much remains unclear about what transpired at Wells Fargo and the regulators' response. It appears that Wells Fargo's own analysis concluded that thousands of its employees opened more than 2 million accounts that may not have been authorized. Subsequently, Wells Fargo terminated approximately 5,300 employees and has agreed to pay $185 million in fines and $5 million in customer remediation. Sales data show that Wells Fargo has been an industry leader in its ability to cross-sell products such as credit cards, checking accounts, and home equity loans. A number of former Wells Fargo employees have described a work environment characterized by intense pressure to meet aggressive and unrealistic sales goals. In a 2010 letter to shareholders, Mr. Stumpf wrote that Wells Fargo's goal was 8 products per customer because 8 rhymed with great. The result was a corporate culture that drove company team members to fraudulently open millions of accounts using their customers' funds and personal information without their permission. I've often said that banking is based on trust, and that trust was broken at Wells Fargo. While much has been written about these events, I believe there are several questions that warrant answers. First, when did this conduct start at Wells Fargo, and why were the regulators unaware of this growing problem? Second, when did Mr. Stumpf and his senior management become aware of these activities, and how did they respond? Third, have all the appropriate Wells Fargo employees been held accountable, and to what extent? Finally, where were the federal regulators while certain Wells Fargo employees were taking advantage of unsuspecting customers over a period of many years? Here's what we do know. Wells Fargo's internal review only covers unauthorized accounts dating back to 2011. News reports and court documents suggest these problems might have existed long before then. The 2013 Los Angeles Times articles led to the LA City Attorney's Office investigation into Wells Fargo's sales practices. Thousands of man-hours by a dozen dedicated LA City attorneys culminated in a lawsuit filed against Wells Fargo in May of 2015. This timeline begs the question, where were the federal regulators during these years? If the OCC and the CFPB were aware of these issues before the LA City Attorney's lawsuit, why did they wait until 2016 to bring an enforcement action? Why did it take an LA Times reporter to uncover what should have been uncovered by Wells Fargo's regulators? If there were ever a textbook case where consumers needed protection, this was it. How many millions of unauthorized accounts does it take before the CFPB notices? And while the Bureau is billing this as the largest settlement in its history, it's unclear whether it had any significant role in discovering or investigating the bank's conduct. Just as it's fair to ask Mr. Stumpf what he knew when he learned it and what he did about it, it's also fair to ask those same questions of Wells Fargo's regulators. There are simple facts and circumstances, questions that both the OCC and the CFPB should be able to answer without violating any confidentiality restrictions. I look forward to today's hearing as both Congress and the American people, especially the aggrieved consumers, have been kept in the dark for far too long. Senator Brown.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling this hearing. I want to commend the City of Los Angeles, the OCC, and the CFPB for their actions, and the LA Times for bringing this to light. I was stunned when I learned of the breadth and the duration of the fraud committed by Wells Fargo. I hope today we can begin to understand what went wrong and what needs to be done. I call it fraud because I got tired of the euphemisms a long time ago. I think the American people did too. This is not a matter of customers who receive products and services they did not want or need, as Wells Fargo puts it. That makes it sound like there was a mix-up under the Christmas tree, and I got the right-handed baseball glove that was meant for my brother Charlie. This is 5,300 employees. Wells Fargo calls them team members. 5,300 team members forging signatures, stealing identities, Social Security numbers, and customers' hard-earned cash so as to hang on to their low-paying jobs and make money for the high-paid executives at Wells Fargo. And they did it for at least 5 years. Wells Fargo's reaction has been remarkable. It did not treat this as a big problem until it appeared in the newspapers. It did not begin to make customers whole until this year. And we don't know whether the bank chose to do so or was told they had to do so. Wells Fargo is taking out full-page ads claiming it is accountable and accepts responsibility. It has not admitted to responsibility for a single misdeed in the dealings with the City of Los Angeles and the federal government. Wells Fargo claims to have made things right with its customers, but its efforts have been incomplete. For example, it's not clear that PwC calculated the cost of a lower credit score, which might be paid every month for 30 years. At times, the bank has been downright hostile to aggrieved customers. Rather than letting fraud victims have their day in court, Wells Fargo forced customers to abide by the mandatory arbitration clauses in their real accounts. You heard that right. The bank invoked the fine print on a real account to block redress on a fake one, which Wells Fargo had created. Wells Fargo team members, many struggling to support a family on $12 or $15 an hour. My understanding is Wells Fargo tellers make about $11.80 an hour. Wells Fargo team members struggling to support a family on $12 to $15 an hour followed their manager's guidance to do whatever it took to make their quotas. Some may have worked off the clock. Others cut corners to avoid being fired for missing goals that Wells now admits were too high. They've been accountable, these low-income workers. The workers lost their jobs with no parachute of any color. And it's not just 5,300 team members who paid the price, because many more were fired when they couldn't meet the quotas. Still more chose to quit rather than cheat. By contrast, Ms. Carrie Tolstead, the Senior Executive Vice President for Community Banking, has done quite well. She knew of this problem at least 5 years ago and is retiring with a package that may be worth more than the CFPB's record fine of $100 million. So 5,300 team members earning perhaps $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year have lost their jobs, while Ms. Tolstead walks away with up to $120 million. Despite firing thousands of team members, Ms. Tolstead apparently decided it was not important enough to alert the head of the company, Mr. Stumpf, or the board of directors or anyone else for two years, if ever, even though you both sat on that bank's board. Senior management and the board of directors apparently agreed. Once the scandal became public, remedial actions were stepped up against frontline team members, but the praise and performance bonuses continued to be lavish upon Ms. Tolstead until as recently as 2 months ago. You would think the lessons of the financial crisis, which came at such a high cost to our country, would change the way the banks do business. And to be fair, many banks did take the lessons of the financial crisis to heart. But for the largest banks in this country, every week we hear of a new lawsuit or enforcement action against one of them, week after week after week after week. What are some of these lessons? First, the culture in these banks needs to change. That starts at the top. Second, there must be a reliable way for legitimate complaints to end up in the C-suite rather than the circular file. Third, in the wake of the rampant robo-signing fraud that we saw at Wells Fargo and other places, banks need better controls. Because fourth, if you pay people on the basis of how many products they sell, that's what they'll do, whether it's in the interests of the customers or not. And base pay needs to be increased. Finally, change the pay structure or at least make incentives deferred so it's clear that customer and company interests are aligned and enduring. Wells Fargo's come up short on all 5 counts. That conclusion is not just based on this, its latest scandal. Last year, Wells settled with the OCC for, among other things, 11 years' worth of deceptive practices in selling enhanced identity theft protection. So at the same time, think about this, at the same time the bank was stealing customer identities, it was charging for protecting them. If the Wells ID theft product that they sold didn't discover the fraudulent Wells accounts, perhaps some refunds are due. This April, Wells settled a False Claim Act suit for $1.2 billion, in part because it had used bonuses to get staff, quote, to churn out and approve an ever-increasing quantity of FHA loans and applying pressure on loan officers and underwriters to originate and approve more and more FHA loans as quickly as possible, unquote. Thousands of Americans we know so well, although unfortunately far too few of us know any of these people personally. Thousands of Americans lost their home through mortgage foreclosures as a result. So I hope, Mr. Stumpf, you will level with this committee and the public. Words that come like a San Francisco fog on little cat feet won't cut it. These were not magically delivered unwanted products. This was fraud that you did not find or fraud that you did not fix quickly enough. Instead of focusing on damage control, you need to admit to the problems and fix them and treat your customers in real life like you do in your vision statement. That would be the best damage control of all for your customers, for your bank, for your industry, and for our country. Thank you.
Mr. Stumpf, will you rise and be sworn? Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Mr. Stumpf, your written statement will be made part of the hearing record. You proceed as you wish. Welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chairman Shelby, Ranking Member Brown, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to be with you today. I am Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Wells Fargo, where I have worked for nearly 35 years. It is my privilege to lead this company, which was founded 164 years ago and has played a vital role in the financial history and development of our country. We employ more than 268,000 team members, 95% of whom are in the United States. 1 in every 600 working adults is a member of the Wells Fargo family, and we have a presence in all 50 states. I am deeply sorry that we failed to fulfill on our responsibility to our customers, to our team members, and to the American public. I've been through many challenges with Wells Fargo, but none of which pains me more than the one we will discuss this morning. Wrongful sales practice behavior in our retail banking business goes against everything regarding our core principles, our ethics, and our culture. It runs counter to our vision of helping our customers succeed financially, and it is not representative of Wells Fargo as an institution. I'm here to discuss the situation today tell you about the actions we have taken and our commitment on how to move forward. Our entire culture is centered on serving our customers, and in this case, we let our customers down. Our retail banking practice issues, sales issues, are not a reflection of our hardworking and talented team members who deserve thanks for helping our customers with their financial needs. I want to make very clear that we never directed nor wanted our team members to provide products and services to customers that they did not want. That is not good for our customers, and that is not good for our business. It is against everything we stand for as a company. That said, I accept full responsibility for all unethical sales practices in our retail banking business, and I am fully committed to fixing this issue, strengthening our culture, and taking the necessary actions to restore our customers' trust. And Senators, let me tell you here today, the Wells Fargo board is actively engaged in this issue. The board has the tools to hold senior management accountable, including me and Carrie Tolstead, the former head of our retail banking business. Any board actions taken with our named executive officers will be appropriately disclosed. And I want to be clear on this. I will respect and accept the decision of the board. Under new leadership, we've already begun taking steps to ensure that the sales culture in our retail banking business is wholly aligned with our customers' interests. On September 13th, 2016, we announced a major decision that we will end product sales goals for everyone in our retail banking business because we want to make certain that nothing gets in the way of doing what is right by our customers. The new leadership team's primary mission will be to provide the best possible service to our customers. I'm also announcing today 3 new initiatives that will reinforce our commitment to our customers. First, we're expanding the scope of our account review and remediation to include both 2009 and 2010. Second, we will be contacting every single one of our deposit customers across the country using the same process that we agreed to with the City of Los Angeles for our California customers. And third, we have begun contacting hundreds of thousands of our customers with open credit cards, including those for whom we've already refunded fees, to confirm whether they need or want their credit card. In addition, we've recently started sending customers a confirmation email within 1 hour of opening any new deposit account and an acknowledgement letter before submitting a credit card application. We recognize now that we should have done more sooner to eliminate unethical conduct or incentives that may have unintentionally encouraged that conduct. We took many incremental steps over the past 5 years in an attempt to address these situations, but we now know those steps were not enough. In 2011, a dedicated team began to engage in proactive monitoring of data analytics, specifically for the purpose of rooting out sales practice violations. In 2012, we began reducing sales goals that team members would need to qualify for incentive compensation. In 2013, we created a new corporate-wide enterprise oversight for sales practices. In 2014, we further revised our incentive compensation plans to align pay with ethical performance. In 2015, we added more enhancements to our training materials further lowered goals, and began a series of town hall meetings to reinforce the importance of ethical leadership and always putting our customers first. Throughout this 5-year period, we identified potential inappropriate sales practices. We investigated those, and we took disciplinary actions that included terminations of managers and team members for sales policy violations, the 5,300 terminations over the 5 years that have been widely reported. Despite all of these efforts, we did not get it right. We should have realized much sooner that the best way to solve the problems in the retail banking business was to completely eliminate retail bank product sales goals. And one of the areas that we missed was the possibility that a customer could be charged fees in connection with accounts opened without their authorization. Because deposit accounts that are not used are automatically closed, we assumed this could not happen. We were wrong. And we took steps to refund fees that were charged and made changes so this could not happen again. In August 2015, we began working with a third-party consulting firm, PricewaterhouseCoopers, which conducted extensive large-scale data analysis of all 82 million accounts, deposit accounts, and nearly 11 million credit card accounts that we had opened from 2011 through 2015. Of the 93 million accounts reviewed, approximately 2%, 1.5 million deposit accounts, and 565,000 consumer credit card accounts were identified as accounts that may have been unauthorized. To be clear, PwC did not find these accounts had been unauthorized, but because it could not rule out the possibility, these accounts were further reviewed to determine if any fees had been charged. PwC calculated that approximately 115,000 of these accounts had incurred $2.6 million of fees, which had been refunded to those customers. Even one unauthorized account is one too many. This type of activity has no place in our culture. We are committed to getting it right 100% of the time, and when we fall short, we accept responsibility, and we will do everything we can to make it right by our customers. I will close by saying again, I am deeply sorry that we have not lived up to our values in this way. I also want to take this opportunity to thank our 268,000 team members who come to work every day to serve our customers. Today, I am making a personal commitment to rebuilding our customers' and investors' trust, the faith of our team members, and the confidence of the American people. I'm happy now to address your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stumpf. Mr. Stumpf, according to your testimony, Wells Fargo began making internal changes in 2011 to address the opening of unauthorized accounts. Did these problems start in 2011, or could there have been unauthorized activity before then? Why 2011?
Yes, I think we all know that not every team member will do everything right every day of every minute. And we do a lot of training of our team members, coaching. They each sign an annual ethics statement, and I can't guarantee it did not happen before that time. We are trying to manage it within the business, and that's why I announced today that we're going back to 2010 and 2009, because at that time, as you might recall, we were putting the Wachovia and Wells Fargo teams together, and we just thought we don't want to leave any stone unturned.
Wells Fargo fired approximately 5,300 employees in connection with these practices. What were the criteria for termination, and were any personnel actions taken short of termination? And if so, what were they? In other words, I'm sure you didn't fire everybody, but did you discipline
Correct.
And why and so forth?
Yeah, so, Senator, thank you for that question, and it's a good one. We have a number of triangulations around how to understand when there might be improper behavior. If some customer, for example, all of a sudden shows up with 3 savings accounts, they probably don't need that. Or we have ethics lines. We have a culture within the company. If you see something that you don't think is proper, raise your hand, talk to a manager. So we looked at a number of situations, and some of them were perfectly legitimate. But for those who broke our trust, were dishonest, put customers at risk, we drew a very bright line. And after all, we are a regulated institution, and we have a fidelity bond, and people who behave in this way simply can't work here.
Mr. Stumpf, your testimony also does not address when the violations were brought to the attention of senior management. Specifically, when did you find out that thousands of your employees were opening unauthorized accounts or fraudulent accounts?
Yes.
Did it take that long?
Yeah.
When did you find out?
Thank you again, Senator. The business has their own audit and investigations and sales practices, efficacy, and so forth contained within the regional bank or the retail bank. After they had been working on this issue for a couple of years, and again, this was way too many people, but it was 1% of our people. There's at any one time 100,000 team members in our banks, and after we noticed, after the business was dealing with this for a couple of years, it was then brought to the holding company, and corporate assets, corporate audit, corporate compliance, the so-called second line of defense got very active, and that's when I became much more aware of the issue.
Does it bother you as a CEO of such a large bank that systemic fraud was not brought to your attention sooner by your employees?
If I could turn the clock back, and I've thought about this 1,000 times, of course I wish I would have done, we all wish we would have done something more earlier. We didn't get on this fast enough. Again, recognizing that this was, the vast majority of people were doing the right thing.
Let's go back to the question a minute ago. I don't believe you answered it specifically. When did the senior management, you and others, you deem senior management, learn about this fraud?
I can speak for myself, and I know that other corporate executives at the corporate area outside of the business, I can speak to myself, and I believe others, it was 2013. Before that, it was being dealt with the audit and compliance within the business unit.
Mr. Stumpf, the board of directors of Wells Fargo has awarded the then head of the community banking, Kerry Tolstad, millions of dollars, could be $100 million, as Senator Brown says or more, in incentive compensation for, quote, success in furthering the company's objective of cross-selling products and, quote, reinforcing a strong risk culture, according to the 2015 proxy statement issued by your bank. Explain to the American public today here what accountability at a large bank looks like when an executive departs with millions of dollars in compensation after thousands of her employees defrauded customers.
Yeah.
This question was raised by Senator Brown.
Okay, I'll try to get to all of those, and if I don't, please. But it's a good question, and Kerry Tolstad, as leader of the community banking business, had a lot of requirements and things that her performance was measured on. Putting the Wachovia and Wells business together, doing common branding, making sure customers were treated properly. And throughout that entire period from 2011 until 2016, customer loyalty scores continue to improve. Today, they're top of class, even by independent studies of large banks. Our team member engagement, we do a study every year, and today we have 15 people who are engaged in that business for everyone that's disengaged. Balances and customers had grown. Now, in this particular area, she did not do enough. We decided, the chief operating officer, who she was reporting to at the time, with my consultations, decided that we would go in a different direction. But I also want to be clear. Carrie was eligible to retire when she was told that we're going to go in a different direction. She chose to retire, and she got no retirement severance benefits, and her compensation that she received in the past, some of it which is not, which has been granted but not yet vested, and other compensation will be considered by the Board of Directors in an independent process that they have, and I will respect and accept whatever decision they make.
That'd be clawback? You have ability at the bank to claw back, do you not?
You know, I'm not an expert in compensation, but I will get you whatever.
Now, you're the chairman, you're the CEO of the company, right?
I'm the CEO.
And so are you the chairman of the board?
I'm the chairman of the board.
Okay.
But I do not, excuse me.
And the buck stops here, so to speak.
It stops, I'm the senior officer.
So are you going to look into this seriously about what this person did, her responsibility, and the big reward that she's getting that happened under her watch?
Senator, the Board of Directors, the Compensation Committee, and they'll refer to the board. I'm not part of that process. I want to make sure that that's a very independent process, and nothing that I say would prejudice their deliberative process, but that is their decision, and they have all the tools available to them, whether she would have retired or she would have been fired.
Mr. Stumpf, isn't a lot of banking based on integrity or trust by your customers in the bank itself? They do business with you, they put their money there, they trust you. What's happened to the banking system? Not everywhere, but what has happened to the banking system?
You know, Senator, you think about it exactly the way I think about it. Trust is the core element of any relationship, and surely in the financial services business. And we know we have work to do in that area, and I intend to do all I can to help in that area.
Do you believe you violated that trust?
There is no question with some of our customers, we have violated trust, and we have to work hard to re-earn that.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stumpf, I'll make my question short and ask you to be as concise as possible. Thank you. To start with your response to Senator Shelby, you became aware of the widespread fraud in 2013. Could you be more precise than that?
Yes.
When in 2013?
Well, I became aware that the problems the local business was working on in rooting out this behavior by 1% of our team members, give or take, and I don't want to minimize that we were not making enough progress.
And when did you become aware more precisely?
Yeah, it was later.
Was it the LA Times article that you became?
Yes, it was later in 2013. Well, actually, I don't remember the exact time frame. I can get back to you as staff, but it was sometime in 2013.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned that the Wachovia merger, that you're willing to go back before 2011, 2009, and 10, in part because of the Wachovia merger. The emphasis on cross-selling dates back at least to the Norwest merger, right? I mean, this has been a Wells Fargo business plan for a number of years. What year was the Norwest merger?
It was 2000. Well, was it announced? You're talking about
Norwest merger with Wells.
Yeah, that was 1998.
And so this, while Wachovia merger, there clearly was you're going back to 2009 and 10. You're offering to do that. Why stop at 2009? We hear from people that it's gone on longer than that with the cross-selling and the pressure and the sales goals. Why are you only willing to go to 2009?
Well, Senator, I would tell you this: we want to make it right by any customer, and we agreed with our regulators in our agreements to go back to 2011. We made a decision to go back to 2010 and 9, and we want to make it right by any customer.
Does that mean you're willing to go back earlier than 2009?
Well, I can't tell you that today. I'd have to talk to our folks. I don't know about records and so forth, but I want to make sure any customer who has had harm of any kind, that we will do right by them.
Well, you have records before 2009. Is that a pledge from you to go back earlier than that if, in fact, there are customers that were harmed by unauthorized accounts?
Senator, I will take that under advisement.
Okay, well,
and I'll get back to your team
and
on
and I accept your good intentions that you're going back to 2009 to give restitution to those, provide restitution to those customers, but why stop there if you know that you say you have to go back and talk to staff? I mean, if you really do want to make sure these customers are made whole, you should go back as long as you possibly can.
And Senator, again, I think that's we've considered that. We'll take that under advisement.
Well, I hope you more than consider it. Thank you. We'll talk about Senator Shelby's, Chairman Shelby's discussion on the clawback. Understanding, I think you minimize your influence, to us at least, you minimize your influence with the board. You're the chairman of the board. Understand that the board goes through a process, and I respect that. But you as the chairman, are you going to recommend to the board? Well, back up. You, I would assume, are more familiar with both the pros and the cons of performance from Ms. Tolstead. You are aware that she is slated to get, some news reports say, up to $120 million. You're also aware that most of the 5,300 team members that were fired, were low-income workers, as low as 11-something an hour, maybe up to $16 or $17 an hour, but were generally low-income workers, low-paid workers. So you're more familiar with that than probably any board member, at least as familiar. So will you, with your knowledge and your stature and your position on the board, make a recommendation to this board that they should claw back a significant amount of her compensation?
Okay. Senator, I'll answer that question, but I just want to put something in perspective. The lowest paid worker we have, our entry level in our least cost area, is $12 an hour. Our lowest paid worker in our high cost area is $16.50 an hour. In addition to that, about $6 per hour is also, that doesn't include the benefits around health care, which we pay virtually all of it for low-paid people. But most of the people who lost their jobs because they violated our code of ethics, they were dishonest, were not, those were good-paying jobs. People lost their jobs who were bankers, bank managers, managers or managers, and even an area president. These were good-paying jobs, jobs that were, the averages, I think, were in the, $35,000 to $60,000 area if you just want to take an average. But with respect to your question specifically, I'm not on the Human Resources and Compensation Committee. That's an independent committee, and they will take that under their deliberation. I don't want in any way to prejudice their activity, and I'm going to accept and respect any decision that they make on anything of that.
Thank you for saying that. You are not willing to make a recommendation based on how this looks to the public, that call them good-paying jobs at $16 or $17 an hour or not, compared to what, but I'll put that aside. But whatever these workers were making, they were in the bottom, some percentage of the workforce, whatever. They made mistakes. They were dishonest. They apparently deserved to be fired. I won't dispute that. But, I mean, you're not willing, as the CEO of this bank, to make a public recommendation that you think, to make a public statement that you think Ms. Stumpf, Ms. Tolstead.
Yep.
The Carrie Tolstead, that you're not willing to say publicly that to this committee or to anyone that some of her compensation, over $100 million when she announced her retirement in the last several weeks, that any of it should be clawed back?
I'm going to let the process proceed, and the board's already met, and I made an affirmative comment in my testimony.
Okay, that's unfortunate. You said in your testimony in August 2015, your words, "We began working with PwC," unquote, "to locate and reimburse customers who incurred fees." Was that your decision, or were you directed to do so by the regulators?
Yeah, that was in consultation with regulators and with the city attorney's office.
So you did not on your own, after finding out in late 2013 of these problems, you, through the rest of 2013, month 2, 3 months of 2013, through all of 2014, and then into the first 7 months of 2015, it never occurred to you that you should bring in somebody without the regulators suggesting it or pushing or in consultation. It never occurred to you to bring in somebody to really find out who was hurt, what kinds of issues were going on. How do we find these customers to reimburse them?
Yeah, Senator, that's a good question. I've thought about that a lot, about why, and it was early in 2015, about the time that we were considering or talking about who we would bring in, that we finally connected a dot, and there's no excuse why we didn't connect it before. What happens when an account is open that is not funded? The system eliminates it within a couple of months. If it doesn't get funded, it's not used, it's not started, it's truncated or closed. It never dawned on us, and again, no excuses, and we were wrong. It never dawned that there could be a cycle where a 30-day cycle would have been completed, and there could have been a fee associated with that. It was the first time that light bulb went on.
I appreciate your candor about this, but in 2011, 1,000 employees were fired. 2012, a similar number. 2013 was the peak number. 2013 was the LA Times article. 2015, throughout the year, nothing happened. It seemed to never occur to management to do any of this when it's just, and then today, and I don't question your integrity, but then today you come in and make all these announcements. It's been 5 years since, at least 5 years since all of this has been happening. Today, you make announcements that you're doing you apologize, we appreciate that. You make announcements you're doing the right things, we appreciate that. But it just sort of begs the issue of where was management when so many thousands of people were fired, stories were written, regulators were starting to come in. I understand this is a huge profit center for Wells, the retail banking writ large in terms of the unauthorized accounts and everything else, but it just doesn't seem quite right that it didn't occur to anybody on the board, apparently, or at least that had your ear. Didn't occur to the CEO, didn't occur to top management that they should do something more affirmatively until that August 2015 date when the regulators sort of helped you suggest and come to that conclusion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Corker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stumpf, thank you for being here. Just as an observation, I know that you have a whole host of people here with you, and I'm sure one of those people is a communications person. I would just make the observation, look, I know you talk daily with board members and, been on boards before myself. I would suggest just, again, as an observation, that to not invoke some degree of clawback for yourself and others involved would be committing malpractice from the standpoint of just public relations. So at a minimum, I'm sure that is going to take place. I would be surprised if it doesn't. Let me just, you found out about this through reading the LA Times, is that correct?
No, I don't recall back in 2013 exactly the time frame, but I learned about it later in 2013. Remember, I'm sorry.
But it sounds like it really was brought to your attention after a story in a newspaper. Well, that's when the focus really began. I'm not criticizing that. I'm just asking.
The only thing I want to make, Senator Corker, is that we had dismissed a number of people, and that's what caused the LA Times. The story. Yeah.
So y'all had taken some actions. They wrote a story, and
exactly.
It was in
yes.
Your board You know, I know public boards today, you know, and 10 committees that are set up. When did the board realize that you had a unit that was committing fraud? It seems to me that that's one of those things you flagged pretty quickly, or at least a committee of the board.
Yes, and I just want to say, these team members, you're absolutely right. They did not do us right. It was.
I didn't ask that.
Okay.
I'm asking you when the board became aware that you had a unit that was involved in committing fraud.
Yeah, it would have been later 2013 and then 2014 and on.
So they weren't even aware of the LA Times story.
Oh, I think that was later in 2013. I'd have to go back and check my records, and it's the best of what I remember. But it was sometime, you know, later 13, surely in 14.
I read a story about Ms. Tolstead today. I don't know her. Actually, you know, sounds like she was an incredibly hard worker, got to work early, rode a bus, you know, micromanaged, signed leases herself. I don't know if any of this was true. But how do you, when you have somebody that's that involved in sort of micro details, is this a case of not raising their head up to 5,000 or 10,000 feet and understanding the kind of culture that was being created by slogans like 8 is great and those kinds of things? I mean, it's just hard to, you know, it seems to me that within a bank, with all the data you use to contact customers, and I mean, you can, with algorithms, I mean, you guys can pick this stuff up so quickly. It's hard to believe that there isn't some report within the bank that would cause this to jump out at people and say something really bad is happening here.
Yeah, Senator Corker, I think that's a good question. And in a retail business where you have 100,000 people in seats at any one time in our 6,200 branches, there is a lot of turnover, and I'm not justifying in
well, no. But
any one case.
But there's an officer, there's a compliance officer.
Absolutely.
And all banks have these. I mean, y'all are regulated to death, and that's their job. And this is something that you would think would be flagged and jump out at someone who was in that job.
Thank you, and that's what I was trying to explain. That in her business, surely she was, I believe, and reporting situations where there was ethical breakdowns and cash.
But not to the board.
And it got to the board level, it got to the corporate level in 2013 because progress was not being made, and the board level in 14 as the corporate resources started to, and we've been actually seeing improvement since that time.
It does seem like there was, just in fairness, again, there does seem like a big disconnect there. So she left after 27 years, and I think it would be good for the audience at some point, not during my time, to explain the entire compensation. I think it's a little different than most people think based on some of the comments that have been made. But I assume her departure after 27 years was based on this issue. Is that correct?
It was based on a number of issues. This is one of them. We want to take the business in a different direction, and we also.
So she, in essence, was terminated over this issue.
No, Carrie chose to retire. Tim Sloan, our chief operating officer, with my consultation, had a discussion with her. It was sometime in June or July, and said, we want to go in a different direction. We want to put an end. We want to put more focus on this issue. But it was a variety of things, and she was eligible for retirement, and she decided to retire.
Well, my time is up, and out of respect for other members, I will stop. I have numbers of other questions. We thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Stumpf, for being here. Let me try to clarify a bit more your position going forward with respect to the issues of compensation, not just Ms. Tolstead, but even your own compensation. Will you formally recuse yourself from board deliberations?
Well, I'm not even involved in board discussions around what the HRC does with anything in respect to me and or as they recommend to the board. So there's no recusal required, but I'm happy to do that, but I'm not even involved in that.
It will ultimately come up, though, to the board for a vote of affirmation of the Compensation Committee, correct?
It would, and I'm not part of that. That's done in an executive session without me. It's always been done that way.
All right. In 2013, when you learned of this, what did you do? This has been asked several different ways. Did you inform the regulators or instruct someone to inform the regulators of a growing problem?
Thank you, Mr. Reed. Yes, and I should have mentioned that earlier, but yes, our primary and a prudential regulator was informed at that time.
Did you inform the board at that time?
Yes, I can't recall the exact meeting, but but it was sometime in 13, and I know in 2014, various committees of the board were made aware of this: the risk committee, the audit and examination, the corporate responsibility.
Did you take any steps to internally notify your employees of this type of behavior, which going back was, 1,000 people are gone, 12, 13, including an area manager? Did you communicate that, or did you simply keep these discussions internal to the board?
I do a team member town hall every quarter where I go to one of our various cities, and there will be a couple thousand people in the audience, and then we webcast that broadly across our company. And I, typically talk about ethics and doing what's right for customers. And in the case, the vast majority do it, but I was trying to really bring home this fact.
There was given specific evidence of techniques used to essentially, in the words of my colleagues, and to defraud customers. Those specific practices were not focused upon and made very clear that they were not tolerated, or was it would seem to be a generic discussion of follow the rules?
Again, Senator Reed, at the time that the escalation happened in 2013, there were many different meetings and things happening, as I mentioned in my written or my oral testimony, about reducing goals, talking about sales efficacy, having manager meetings, talking with leaders, putting more controls in place. And again, not fast enough, not far enough, and I apologize for that.
Well, it seems that, and I would suspect looking back, that the emphasis on meeting sales objectives, cross-selling was unremitting. And yet you had examples here, specific examples of things that you knew were happening and should not be happening. And yet what I'm hearing is more or less a generic, make those sales, oh, and by the way, we have this ethical rules in place too. Again, I think you've said it, and it's obvious that the tone, emphasis, what the leader does, what the leader says, is sometimes more important than anything else.
Yeah.
And for a period there, this was recognized, but there was no specific stop this stuff.
Well, I can tell you, we said, stop this stuff. And the thing about cross-sell is I'd rather have a customer with 2 products that they use and they need and they want and they value than 4 products that are not used and valued. In the first case, customer wins, we win, we all do well. In the second case, everybody loses. We lose money. It does not help us. So we tried very hard, and again, we were not as effective as we could have been in talking about, the goal here is not, products. The goal here is deep relationships. We had the wrong tool for too long to make that happen.
I simply, in conclusion, it just seems that it took too many months, years, literally, for some simple steps which should have been taken to be taken. And it was only, I think, as a result of what ultimately Los Angeles County and the regulators and others did that forced the issue. Thank you, Mr. Stumpf.
Thank you.
Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for calling this hearing. I have to say, what we've been learning is so deeply disturbing at so many levels. First, we discover that Wells Fargo had a sales culture that was blatantly antithetical to what's best for customers. We discover that management had far too few common sense controls in place to prevent the kind of abuse that customers were subject to. We discover Wells Fargo executives completely out of touch. In a 2011 Forbes article, Wells Fargo was rated the best at cross-selling its products. Only problem is we discovered Wells Fargo wasn't always cross-selling. Signing up customers for products when you know the customer doesn't want the product. Failing to notify customers about these sham accounts open in there. This isn't cross-selling, this is fraud. That's what this is. And then we discover way too little done to prevent it from continuing even after it was discovered. So Wells Fargo employees continued for years to literally forge customer signatures, including my constituents, on documents to open up accounts. And then the case of Carrie Tolstead, my understanding is that something on the order of over $20 million in bonuses for her between 2010 and 2015 were awarded because of strong cross-sell ratios. Yet we know in some cases she was hitting numbers by these fraudulent accounts. So this is unbelievable. Let me begin, Mr. Stumpf. Do you acknowledge that the employees who engaged in this activity were committing fraud?
You know, I'm not a criminal, officer, and I don't know I'm not a lawyer, and I know the legal term. I know this. They broke our code of ethics. They were dishonest, and we did everything we can to support law enforcement on these issues.
I'm not a lawyer either. Neither are most adults in America, but I think most people understand the meaning of the word fraud. Black Law's dictionary does provide a useful definition. It says, fraud is a knowing misrepresentation or knowing concealment of a material fact made to induce another to act to his or her detriment. How does falsely signing a customer up for an account they don't want, how does it not meet that definition?
Well, and again, if that's a definition that I can tell you this is absolutely wrong. We found this out. We got rid of those people, and they have no place. That behavior has no place in our culture. If that means fraud, that means fraud.
At what point did you alert your regulators and law enforcement that you had probably criminal activity happening on a large scale?
Yeah, well, again, it was 1% of our people, Senator, and
but
I know that
5,000 is a big number.
It's bigger than my hometown. I do know that, and it was. But we also had the vast majority who did the right thing. But let's talk about those. Every time, and we made a very bright line. If it happened one time, it was one time.
I know. I have only 5 minutes.
Oh, okay, and answer your question. I'm sorry. We sent it. We did everything we needed.
Did you refer to law enforcement
when it was required? We did everything according to the rules.
When did you begin to disclose in SEC filings that you had this potentially material adverse set of circumstances that could certainly have huge damage to your reputational value?
Well, I don't. I can't answer that. I'd have to get to our legal team. I don't have that in front of me. But this was not I'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know.
Well, we haven't been able to discover such a disclosure, and the SEC very clearly requires disclosure of material adverse circumstances. And I don't know how this could not be deemed material. I think the market cap lost 9% over the last couple of weeks. That's pretty material.
Yeah. Well, from a financial perspective, $2.6 million, and it's $2.6 million too much, and $185 million was not deemed material.
I get that those dollar amounts may not qualify as material to a bank the size of Wells Fargo, but the reputational damage done to the bank clearly is material, and that has been manifested by this huge adverse movement in stock prices. Let me raise one other issue. You mentioned in your testimony, and you state unequivocally, that there are no orchestrated effort or scheme, as some have called it, by the company. But when thousands of people conduct the same kind of fraudulent activity, it's a stretch to believe that every one of them independently conjured up this idea of how they would commit this fraud. Isn't it very probable that there was some orchestration that happened at some level? If not, I'm not suggesting it was you personally by any means, but doesn't it defy common sense to think that there wasn't some orchestration of this?
You know, Senator, I don't know what motivated or why people did this, but we did fire managers and managers of managers, and in the case, an area president. So again, you know, this 1% is way too many. I don't want to minimize it, but I also want to make sure that we recognize that the vast majority of the people did exactly the things we wanted them to do to help deepen customer relationships, help them succeed financially. And also, we have put a number of other controls in place besides taking sales goals off the table. We don't open any deposit account today or any credit card without a signature. And while there's a couple of cases where ADA and where they can't, we'll have a dual notice, we're also doing mystery shopping, and we're also giving customers a 1-hour notice by email, or if they don't have an email, by letter, to make sure that we know exactly and they know exactly what they've opened.
It seems like it took an awfully long time to impose those sort of basic controls. I see I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thanks for in response. I know you said you were already on the way, but
sure.
The letter that we sent asking you for this hearing, so I appreciate you holding it. Mr. Stumpf, let me just say I'm personally appalled by the size, the scope, the duration, and the impact of the scandal. And I must say that I'm shocked and incredibly disappointed by the response of Wells Fargo's corporate executives. In the last week, you and your chief financial officer have taken to the press and laid the blame squarely on low-paid retail bank employees. And while I don't excuse what they did by any stretch of the imagination, I find that despicable. Well, Wells Fargo touts to its investors and its customers that we will never put the stagecoach before the horses. Well, I'll tell you what, the bank recklessly rolled over $2 million of your customers in what is no way can be viewed as other than a large-scale scheme to boost, you know, your growth and whatever that meant for your shares and whatever that meant to your shareholders. So you didn't fire 10 employees, right? You didn't fire 500 employees. You fired 5,300 employees. Is that right?
Yes, 5,300 people did not honor our culture.
And they were not located in one branch or one district. Is that right?
That is correct.
They were located across the country. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
Now, shouldn't the workplace actions of employees reflect the values of the institution, no matter what part of the country that they're in?
I absolutely agree with that.
So do you believe that senior executives like yourself are responsible for nurturing and honing a company-wide culture for your employees and your employees' actions?
Absolutely.
So this isn't the work of 5,300 bad apples. This is the work and the result of sowing seeds that rotted the entire orchard. And whether tacitly through sales guides and employee training manuals, some of which I've reviewed, or more explicitly through demands from hard-driving managers, you and your senior executives created an environment in which this culture of deception and deceit thrive. And yet, you know, I see this as a toxic combination of low wages. Now, I know that in response to Senator Brown's question, as what is an average banker at Wells Fargo made, you said between $30,000 and $60,000. You said that's good money. How much money did you make last year?
$19.3 million.
Now that's good money. Now that's good money. This is a combination of low wages, punishing sales quotas, and a grossly misaligned compensation incentive throughout the bank's organizational structure, as is evidence that you've removed it. Now, when you were holding these ethics sessions, did you ever specifically, seeing this information begin to blip up on your radar screen, and then more insignificantly, did you ever specifically say in those sessions, we do not want to open accounts for our customers that they don't ask for? Did you specifically say that?
Senator, I will get to that question, but I just must go back for a second. When a team member opens an account that's not used, that does not help customer and does not help us. and the vast majority did the absolute right thing.
Did you specifically
And I
say?
specifically said, yes, we do not push products. We sit down with a customer, we have a needs-based analysis, and then based on what we hear where the customer is in their financial journey, we match products.
Did you specifically say that, in fact, I don't want to see accounts open for customers that they did not ask for?
Absolutely.
When did you say that?
I've said that many times in many town halls.
Let me ask you, Ms. Tolstead made about $9 million in salary, did she not, last year?
You know, it's in our public
She made about
filings.
$9.1 million in salary, bonus, and stock awards. The average, according to Glassdoor, the average Wells Fargo banker teller salary is $24,545, and the average salary for a Wells Fargo personal banker is $37,560. So imagine, do you know what the poverty wage is for a family of three?
I do not have that in
Well,
front of me.
let me just share it with you. I didn't think you would. It's $24,300. For a family of three, it's $20,160. So imagine for a moment, you're a single parent working with two young children as a personal banker in Wells Fargo's branch. Let's say your base salary is somewhere in the $30,000 range. You have a hard-driving boss breathing down your neck to meet rigorous sales quotas. You got to call into a call center when you don't meet those quotas, and if you don't meet the quota one day, it gets carried over to the next day, so you got even a higher quota. And you're being told, forget about the incentive of making more money. In essence, this is about losing your job. And you think that that environment was the appropriate environment to protect your customers and to have the culture that you portray here that Wells Fargo had?
Senator Menendez, I get your question. We have been reducing sales goals and bringing other goals into place even before we decided to get rid of the sales product goals. And the vast majority love Wells Fargo. And in fact, when we go to our regional banking, our retail banking people, 15 of our people in survey, it's actually a census done by Gallup every year, love the environment in Wells Fargo, and they put customers first. I can't excuse the behavior of the 1,000. I know it's too many, but the culture is a very caring and collaborative culture.
Well, I know my time is up, but let me just ask you a final question before hopefully the chairman will have a second round. Did you or any senior executive at Wells Fargo suffer any financial consequence as a result of what's transpired over the years?
The board will take, well, first of all...
To date, have you suffered any financial consequences?
The board has gone through, and yes, people have been held accountable.
Senior executive management.
Senior executive
I'd like you to classify for me what that is.
Okay, well, people that are in charge of risk in the retail bank, people that are in charge of sales efficacy, regional presidents who don't meet their goals around proper sales. Yes, people are held accountable, and they will be held accountable.
Senator Heller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing and for our witness for being here today. I appreciate it. For years, the people of Nevada have struggled to regain what they lost in the aftermath of the housing crisis. And we all know that this housing crisis was caused by greed and excess. And for too long, Nevada often has had the unfortunate distinction of having one of the highest rates of unemployment, foreclosures, underwater homes, homes sold in short sales, and personal bankruptcies. So trust, to me, is the center point of any relationship with a business, and I assume it's the same, that Wells Fargo has broken that trust. I consistently fight to ensure Nevadans retain the protections of their personal privacy, so I was shocked to hear the reports, Mr. Chairman, that the employees of Wells Fargo opened millions of bank accounts and credit cards without customers' consent. The actions of some Wells Fargo employees directly took money from Americans' pockets in order to artificially inflate company quotas. I had a constituent, and I've had a number of constituents call my office. This one happened to be from Henderson, Nevada, emailed me that said she was affected by Wells Fargo's tactics. She said she was insulted that leadership at Wells Fargo was unaware of these policies. And given the culture of wrongdoing that some of your employees exhibited, Taking responsibilities, refunding customers, and conducting internal investigations should only be the first step as we plan to fix this mess. Accountability, reform, and putting your customers' interests first should be Wells Fargo's top priorities. And so with that, Mr. Stumpf, just a couple of questions. Do my constituents have a right to be insulted? I've heard a number of comments, probably more directed at you, that you take the Sergeant Schultz position, that you knew nothing as this was moving ahead, that perhaps you even took, and I heard this from one of my constituents, the Hillary Clinton approach, what difference does it make attitude. And let me tell you why they're talking this way. I've got your letter to your valued customers as you tried to explain to them some of the problems. That you may have seen news recently that some Wells Fargo customers received products and services that they did not need. You didn't tell them you were sorry in your customer service letter. You came to this committee and told us you were sorry, but you didn't tell your customers you were sorry. Do they have a right to be insulted?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, I had a number of media contacts last week, 1 broadcast and 4 in print, and I am sorry. I am accountable when we don't do it right 100% of the time, and I was, I think, misquoted or misunderstood in one where I blame team members. We don't accept behavior that's not consistent with our culture, but I do accept responsibility, and I am sorry.
This letter appears that you're downplaying some of the concerns, and you said that some Wells Fargo customers, well, you know, we're talking almost 2 million accounts that were opened up. Let me ask you this question. Was anybody on your board or yourself, did any of you have any opened unauthorized accounts in your names?
You know, I don't know that. I've not seen a letter, you know, on mine, and I was not refunded any of the dollars.
What would you have done if you had an unauthorized account with somebody forged your own name? What would you have done about that?
Well, I've had that before, where people have forged my name or stolen my identity.
Yeah.
But of course, I would be very disappointed, and I can surely understand your constituents' disappointment, and we have a lot of work. Nevada is a wonderful, important state to us. We've been there a long time, and I apologize to all of the American people and our customers, and we'll make it right.
Can I go back to Carrie Tolstead for a moment? You said you're not on the compensation board, but if the compensation board were to send you a recommendation to approve $100 million as a compensation package for her, would you support that?
You know, I'm not on that board, and I think it's probably, maybe if I could just take a second, as I understand, and I'll get you the information about her $100 million. It's part of it is stock she has either purchased in the open market or exercised and owns for a 27-year career. There are some dollars that are in the money options that she's not yet exercised. And then finally, there is a part of future grants that will be vesting over the few number of years, and the board will consider all of those things. They'll consider her entire situation in their deliberations.
Would you approve that?
You know, again, Senator, I want to be respectful of the committee and respectful of their process, and not any way bias their decision.
Mr. Chairman, my time's run out. Thank you.
Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Brown, for having this hearing. I've been on this committee for nearly 10 years now. You have done something that has never happened in the last 10 years and united this committee on a major topic, and not in a good way. Credit card accounts were opened. Folks didn't know about them. There were fees charged, potentially fines charged. And if customers were unaware that these accounts were opened up, there must have been many instances, since there were 2 million accounts opened up, that negative information was sent to credit bureaus. Is that accurate?
The part that's accurate, there's 565,000 credit cards that were opened up that were never activated. About 400,000 of those have customer signatures on them. And 5.7% of, or less than 6% of those accounts that we opened during that time were not activated, which is a pretty standard industry because people might have them. We're going to go back to each one of those customers now and find out if that was a legitimate signature and an open, and if it's not, we'll make it right.
Okay, but that's not what I asked.
I'm
I
sorry.
asked, was negative information turned into the credit bureaus because of these actions?
You know, I don't know the algorithms of how credit bureaus, but I want to answer your question. I know that when a credit bureau is requested, it has an impact on your credit score.
Well, this is a big deal.
Yes, it is.
And I'm telling you, it is a big deal. I could ask you for the age breakdown on these 2 million accounts that were opened up, but I am telling you that if information was sent into the credit bureaus because of these falsely opened accounts, the impacts on this are far, far, far more than the fees or fines that could be associated with that. What is Wells Fargo doing about that?
Yeah, Senator,
or did that information not get reported to the credit bureaus?
Well, when we pull a credit...
Just ask me. Just tell me. Did the information, if there was fees and fines involved and the credit bureaus requested it, or even if they didn't, did that information get forwarded to the credit bureaus?
I'm trying, sir, I'm trying to work with you.
But a yes or no works.
Yes. We pull a credit bureau for each one of these cards.
Okay. So what's Wells doing about fixing that problem?
Yes.
And be concise.
Okay. We are calling each credit card customer to find out if this truly was a card they wanted.
Okay.
If they want it, we don't want to take away their credit. If they did not want it, we're going to go back and make sure that it's made right by the credit bureau and made right by the customer.
And what's the time frame for that?
We already started that process.
Okay. So now this took 5 years. It's been documented. 2011, maybe even started before that, but 2011 till fairly recently. Now, if I had had a credit card issued in the first volley, and in the meantime, between 2011 and now, I decided to buy a house, and that information was reported to the credit bureau, it could make, you probably could know the figure, but maybe 0.5%, maybe more than that. And on a $500,000 mortgage, the difference between 3.5% and 4% is 50 grand over 30 years. What's being done about that?
We will look at each one of those and determine what...
So you're going to go back in and find out, even if they didn't do business through Wells, if they bought a house and what Wells did impacted their credit rating, you're going to go back and find those folks?
I'm going to go back. We've committed to go back to all of our credit card customers and find out...
Okay, what about the ones that got... You've refunded all their fines, you've refunded all their fees, you've went back to the credit bureau and reestablished their credit rating as of today. What about the folks that may have bought a house through Chase and got a higher interest rate because of it? How are you going to find those folks?
You know, we're working on that. I've told our people, go back and make it right. And I can, as we start going through that, I'm happy to have our team come back and report to you how we're working on that.
Well, I think it's really important that you understand that this is a big deal. I mean, it's a big deal. And I know you feel bad about it. We feel bad about it. But the truth is there's real-world implications here on young families and old families that are going to be put into a poverty situation because of this, even though we think it's just a few $100 in fees. It's more than that, much more than that. So you found out in 2013, and I don't want to beat this horse anymore, but did you find out that they were actually setting up accounts with fraudulent signatures in 2013?
You know, I learned that some of our team members were not doing the right thing, and they were opening accounts on customers, and then we truncated those.
Because it would seem to me that if you guys knew about that, a simple edict would have been pretty helpful. Don't do this. If you do this, you're gone.
And that's, we had even more than that. And what we should have done is get rid of our incentive program.
The last thing, this is just a statement, it's not. But I can tell you that you've said multiple times here that 5,300 people went, and that's basically 1% of your workforce. Every time you say that, you give ammunition to the folks who want to break up the big banks. 5,300 people are more people that live in most towns in Montana. 2 million people is twice the population of the entire state. This is a major screw-up that went on for far too long. I think you know that. But, man, there's going to be a lot of work that has to be done to rectify this situation, if it ever can be rectified. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Great vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Stumpf, I want to follow up on the line of questioning that Senator Tester was just discussing with you. But first, I want to ask a couple of questions about just data, basically. Consumers expect that their private information is going to be protected at their bank and not used to open an unauthorized account. You've gone through that extensively today. Did the third-party analysis that you engaged in determine if these unauthorized accounts were created uniformly across the United States, or were there areas in the United States where they were more heavily created?
Yes, there was a more heavily biased towards the southwestern part of the country.
The information I have indicates that even more specifically includes California and Arizona. Would that be correct?
That would be correct.
I also have New Jersey here on my list. Was New Jersey more heavily impacted?
Well, I have numbers by state, and it typically related to there was some over-index or people did more wrong things, but it more associated with the size of the business. We're a much larger bank in Southern California and Arizona, New Jersey. There are places where we're larger, and it fit more the pattern of the size of our organization in those communities.
So because of that, it wasn't necessarily that the management in those communities were potentially the ones who were driving this more aggressively, but simply the size of your business in those communities.
Senator, it was a bit of both.
All right, thank you. Obviously, one of the questions that my constituents and constituents across the country have is, am I one of those who has had an unauthorized account created in my name? And you've indicated that right now Wells Fargo is calling every customer. Is that correct?
We are contacting all of our deposit customers, and on the credit, and incidentally, virtually all of these accounts came on the books and were closed within a 60-day period. And so there's of the potential, again, the 2 million accounts, they could not be eliminated. And I think I said that in my oral testimony. So I don't know, we just couldn't eliminate them, so, or PwC could not. But we're calling all of our credit card customers and contacting all of our deposit customers. And we have a special a call-in number. We're asking people to come into our banks and talk to our people.
Look, that was my next question. If there's somebody who doesn't want to wait for the call, what can they do?
I mean, they're going to get a notice and say, if you have an interest, you can email us, we'll call you, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that and I know our study was, PwC was very comprehensive. We tried to err on the side of the customer. In fact, we're getting people coming to our bank today saying, I got a $25 check, but I wanted this service. And I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that we want to make sure that we don't hurt any customer, and that if they wanted credit, they have it. If they didn't want it, we'll try to make it right by them.
All right, getting back to Senator Tester's question about the credit impact, the simple opening of an account causes an impact to a credit rating, doesn't it?
It does and again, I'm not an expert in this field, but I know on the credit card side, we pull a bureau, and depending on how many bureau, I know that is a strike. Again, it lowers your credit score depending on how many requests are in that time. There's also a positive impact, and I'm not here to justify we will do what's right to make that right.
Well, and that's what I wanted to get at finally in the last minute I have in my questioning. You said to Senator Tester, and you just said again to me, that you're going to make it right. How do you do that? For example, you said that calls have been being made. I assume that in the calls that the bank is making that they are finding customers, some, who have unauthorized and unwanted credit card accounts. How do you make it right with regard to the impact that and potentially charges on that account have caused to the credit rating of that cardholder?
And Senator, that is a very good question. We're just starting that process. I don't have enough to give you right now, but we'd be happy to come back to the committee and tell you more about what we learn as we do that.
All right, thank you. In the little bit of time I have left, I want to shift topics. My understanding is that the primary regulators that you have been dealing with are the City of Los Angeles and the OCC and the CFPB. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Could you just give me a timeline? When did each of those notify you, or did you notify them at some point? In what order did they get involved, and when?
I don't know that I have the precise dates, but I'll give you a general timeline. The City of LA lawsuit was sometime in the May timeframe of 2015. 13 maybe it was. And I'm sorry, I'm missing on dates here. And then the OCC was involved. We shared with them. And when we learned of their lawsuit, we well, it was actually in 15. I'm sorry, 2015, May of 15. And then we shared that information with the CFPB. But the OCC was involved with us prior to probably the 2013 timeframe.
So the OCC probably would have been involved first, even before the City of Los Angeles?
They are our principal regulator, and yes.
All right, and then the CFPB would have been the final entity that was the last into.
We noticed, we called them, someone from our legal department called them, I believe, in the May timeframe of 2015.
All right, I'm sorry, I see my time is well over now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stumpf, the Wells Fargo Vision and Values Statement, which you frequently cite, says, quote, "We believe in values lived, not phrases memorized. If you want to find out how strong a company's ethics are, don't listen to what its people say, watch what they do." So let's do that. Since this massive years-long scam came to light, you have said repeatedly, quote, "I am accountable." But what have you actually done to hold yourself accountable? Have you resigned as CEO or chairman of Wells Fargo?
The board, I serve at
Have you resigned?
No, I've not.
All right. Have you returned one nickel of the millions of dollars that you were paid while this scam was going on?
Well, first of all, this was by 1% of our people.
That's not my question. My question is about responsibility. Have you returned one nickel of the millions of dollars that you were paid while this scam was going on?
The board will take care of that.
Have you returned one nickel of the money you earned while this scam was going on?
And the board will do.
I will take that as a no then. Have you fired a single senior executive? And by that, I don't mean a regional manager or a branch manager. I'm asking about the people who actually led your community banking division or your compliance division.
We've made a change in our regional, to lead our regional bank.
I just said, I'm not asking about regional managers. I'm not asking about branch managers. I'm asking if you have fired senior management, the people who actually led community banking division, who oversaw this fraud, or the compliance division that was in charge of making sure that the bank complied with the law.
Carrie Toll said.
Did you fire
no.
any of those people? No. Okay. So you haven't resigned. You haven't returned a single nickel of your personal earnings. You haven't fired a single senior executive. Instead, evidently, your definition of accountable is to push the blame to your low-level employees who don't have the money for a fancy PR firm to defend themselves. It's gutless leadership. In your time as chairman and CEO, Wells has been famous for cross-selling, which is pushing existing customers to open more accounts. Cross-selling is one of the main reasons that Wells has become the most valuable bank in the world. Wells measures cross-selling by the number of different accounts a customer has with Wells. Other big banks average fewer than 3 accounts per customer, but you set the target at 8 accounts. Every customer of Wells should have 8 accounts with the bank. And that's not because you ran the numbers and found that the average customer needed 8 banking accounts. It is because, quote, 8 rhymes with great. This was your rationale right there in your 2010 annual report. Cross-selling isn't about helping customers get what they need. If it was, you wouldn't have to squeeze your employees so hard to make it happen. No, cross-selling is all about pumping up Wells' stock price, isn't it?
No, cross-selling is shorthand for deepening relationships. We only do well.
Let me stop you right there. You say no? No? Here are the transcripts of 12 quarterly earnings calls that you participated in from 2012 to 2014, the 3 full years in which we know this scam was going on. I'd like to submit them for the record, if I may, Mr. Chair. Thank you. These are calls where you personally made your pitch to investors and analysts about why Wells Fargo is a great investment. And in all 12 of these calls, you personally cited Wells Fargo's success at cross-selling retail accounts as one of the main reasons to buy more stock in the company. Let me read you a few quotes that you had. April 2012, quote, "We grew our retail banking cross-sell ratio to a record 5.98 products per household." A year later, April 2013, quote, "We achieved record retail banking cross-sell of 6.1 products per household." April 2014, quote, "We achieved record retail banking cross-sell of 6.17 products per household." The ratio kept going up and up, and it didn't matter whether customers used those accounts or not. And guess what? Wall Street loved it. Here is just a sample of the reports from top analysts in those years, all recommending that people buy Wells Fargo stock, in part because of the strong cross-sell numbers. And I'd like to submit them for the record.
Without objections.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So when investors saw good cross-sell numbers, they did while this scam was going on. That was very good for you personally, wasn't it, Mr. Stumpf? Do you know how much money, how much value your stock holdings in Wells Fargo gained while this scam was underway?
Well, first of all, it was not a scam. And cross-sell is a way of deepening relationships. When customers use
We've been through this, Mr. Stumpf. I asked you a very simple question. Do you know how much the value of your stock went up while this scam was going on?
It's all of my compensation is in our public
filing. Do you know how much it was?
It's all in the public filing.
Oh, you're right. It is all in the public records because I looked it up. While this scam was going on, you personally held an average of 6.75 million shares of Wells stock. The share price during this time period went up by about $30, which comes out to more than $200 million in gains, all for you personally, and thanks in part to those cross-sell numbers that you talked about on every one of those calls. You know, here's what really gets me about this, Mr. Stumpf. If one of your tellers took a handful of $20 bills out of the cash drawer, they'd probably be looking at criminal charges for theft. They could end up in prison. But you squeezed your employees to the breaking point so they would cheat customers and you could drive up the value of your stock and put hundreds of millions of dollars in your own pocket. And when it all blew up, you kept your job, you kept your multi-million-dollar bonuses, and you went on television to blame thousands of $12 an hour employees who were just trying to meet cross-sell quotas that made you rich. This is about accountability. You should resign. You should give back the money that you took while this scam was going on, and you should be criminally investigated by both the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. You know, this just isn't right. A cashier who steals a handful of 20s is held accountable, but Wall Street executives who almost never hold themselves accountable, not now and not in 2008 when they crushed the worldwide economy. The only way that Wall Street will change is if executives face jail time when they preside over massive frauds. We need tough new laws to hold corporate executives personally accountable, and we need tough prosecutors who have the courage to go after people at the top. Until then, it will be business as usual. And at giant banks like Wells Fargo, that seems to mean cheating as many customers, investors, and employees as they possibly can. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Vitter.
Mr. Stumpf, what astounds so many Americans and virtually all of us is how significant this fraud was, how widespread it was, for how long a period of time. And related to that, I'm very concerned about this timeline of when top corporate leadership like yourself knew about it. And you've been talking in general about 2013. Is that when the issue was a focus of board discussions, or was that the first time you knew of fraudulent activity and these unwanted accounts being opened against customers' wills?
Thank you, Senator Vitter. As I testified before, this people in our regional bank knew that not every team member would do everything right every day, and they tried to root it out at the business level with their compliance and so forth. And then once—
When did you and folks at your level, like board members, know of this activity on any significant scale? Was it 2013, which you have suggested, or was it earlier?
2013.
Okay. So in 2011, about 1,000 employees were fired over this. That's about 1% of the whole retail business. So 1% of a whole big part of your business was fired over fraud, and you were never told about that.
That was dealt with in the business unit at that time.
Is it normal for 1% of a business unit to be fired over fraud? Not high turnover, not incompetence, fraud.
Yeah.
And this never is mentioned to you?
Yeah, in a large retail business that has other turnovers and so forth, if I could go back, I would have, spent more time on this.
Why isn't this crystal clear proof that an entity as big as Wells is not only too big to fail, but it's too big to manage and it's too big to regulate? 1% of a big part of your business is fired over fraud, but that doesn't rise to your level.
Yeah, and Senator, that's a good question. I've thought about that. This was a problem of focus and not of size. Today—
Let's talk about corporate culture. You've often referred to people not living up to the Wells culture. Culture is not something written in a handbook. Culture, as has been suggested, is an atmosphere and what is lived.
I agree.
Wasn't this practice, in fact, by the numbers, part of the Wells culture by definition, because it was so widespread for so long a period of time?
I think this is not part of our culture. This was and again, it's a large number, but the vast majority of our people do it right every day, and they provide great value, and they live according to our culture and vision and values.
And if it's a widespread practice for many years, I'll just make a statement. That makes it part of the culture, in my opinion. So it seems to me your challenge is to change the culture, not to enforce the culture.
Well,
finally, what level of confidence from 0% to 100% do you have that this type of fraudulent activity does not exist in other Wells business lines?
Yeah, we've looked at other things, other businesses. They're different, and we believe that this is, situated in our regional bank. Other areas have different levels of compliance and different volumes and different requirements, but we've looked across a number of things, and I'm confident that we have this one now solved, and we've made a lot of changes.
So just as an example, Wells is the biggest participant in the SBA's 7A loan program.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to chair the Small Business Committee, so I'm focused on a lot of small business issues. Are you 100% confident that no fraudulent activity like this or no extreme quotas and goals exist in that 7A program?
Yeah, we don't have product goals, to my knowledge, in any one of our other businesses, and we have, of course, because of this situation, we've doubled down on compliance and review in a lot of our businesses across the board.
Well, I'm writing several of those compliance folks to urge a look at anything small business related, including the 7A program, since Wells is the leader in that activity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stumpf, you had previously talked to me about Wells Fargo values. And look at the mess we are in. A community banker from my state called the office unsolicited and just sick. And he said, here we go again, where my bank is, and a local community bank, my bank's going to be slandered because of what these guys are doing. And he said, if my bank had a widespread practice of opening unauthorized accounts and moving customer money without permission, I would be in jail. My bank would be sold, and my entire management team and board would be sued by the regulators for a lack of oversight. And he is sick to his stomach about what has happened here. And so am I. Over 5,000 people from Indiana, 5,000 Hoosiers who every day, as everybody has talked about from their own states, every day these people work non-stop to try to pay the bills, take care of their family, make sure that they can make ends meet, and they hope that they can. Over 2 million plus across the country, but over 5,000 Hoosiers who had unauthorized accounts opened. Now, the second many of these credit cards are opened, these folks' credit was immediately dinged. And this is something Senator Tester was talking about. Then you go to take out a mortgage, and you got a 30-year mortgage that's at half a point or a point higher because your credit rating has gone down. So what I want to know is one of these things is, will you pay back every single extra dime that these people are going to incur over the 30 years because of the fraudulent action of the people at Wells? It wasn't Sam or Judy, who works at the mill, who was hoping to get a payment that they could afford. It was that their account had fraud committed to it, and now they have to pay more every single month for the next 30 years. How do you pay that back?
Yeah, and thank you, Senator. We've been thinking about that. We're starting to make those calls to our constituents and find out our customers, and I don't have a final answer for you, but our intention is to make it right by every customer.
So do you promise to pay back every single extra dollar these people are going to incur over the next 30 years?
You know, Senator, I want to work with you, and I'm trying to be cooperative. I just don't have all those answers you today, but I surely get the issue, and my instructions have been to make it right by every customer.
One of the things that rubs everybody wrong around here, but not just here, around the country, Americans are fair people, and everybody in this country tries to make sure that there's a square deal done. It's not a square deal when the people that are fired are the tellers who make 15 bucks and the senior execs walk off with $100 million. Right. Americans can smell an unfair deal a mile away. And when this teller, these 5,300 tellers, they didn't come up with this scheme on their own. This is the only way they could keep their jobs because of what was going on. And you called them dishonest. And my question is, was Carrie Tolstead, the head of all of this, is she dishonest? And how do you fire someone making 15 bucks and not the person in? That's like firing the guy throwing coal in the engine and letting the captain go strolling off to a $100 million new ship. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think that's an important question. First of all, most of the people were bankers who were not making $15 an hour, managers of those, and managers of those. And there's something very different about violating our code of ethics and putting customers at risk and being dishonest versus someone who did not spend enough time making sure that this issue had been closed. I see a very big difference.
Well, I think one of the things that the American people are just disgusted about is it seems like it all flows downhill. And the people down the hill get fired, don't even know if they can pay their mortgage because of the job they had, they're gone. And that the people up on the top of the hill make 20 million, 10 million. Yeah. You know, the fellas who started the Wells Fargo stagecoach, this was not their plan. This is not what we do. And the only last question I have, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman, but it's this. For 5 years.
Yeah, we should.
5 years. And so when folks say, this is too big to fail, for 5 years, you were not able to end this. And you look and you go, for 5 years, Americans were taken advantage of and were cheated, had their credit ratings ruined, had accounts opened that they never even knew about. And this bank, either you didn't know or you knew and it was great for the story. You know, under any circumstance, none of the conclusions is good.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. We did not move fast enough. We should have done better. But I also want to remind you that the vast majority of people also had families to feed, and they did exactly the right thing. But we are sorry, and we needed to do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Stumpf.
Good morning, Mr. Scott.
I'll tell you,
Senator Scott.
I'll tell you as a senator, I'm frustrated, angry, and really unhappy with what appears to be a toxic culture in parts of your sales organization. As your customer with 2 or 3 mortgages, a couple of accounts, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in my financial institution that I've put so much confidence and trust in. I am, however, thankful for the real heroes that we've heard so little about this morning. The heroes, the employees who went to the press, the customers who went to the OCC, bringing oxygen to a very important conversation and hopefully resolution. I asked myself, and perhaps Rita Murillo gives me the answer, why did not these employees find a safe haven up the chain? If you'll remember, I owned a couple of Allstate insurance agencies, and so the sales culture that was so toxic is also incredibly important for folks looking to support their families who are working paycheck to paycheck. And anyone who suggests that folks who make just a little money must cheat the system is an inconsistent suggestion. I know a lot of folks who are poor who would find that comment quite disrespectful. Lots and lots, most poor folks have strong integrity and would never put themselves in this situation. I would suggest that perhaps the higher you go in that chain in the sales organization, the more you find the problem, not the person making the $15 an hour, to be honest with you. My question, though, is why was there not a safe haven, and have you created safe havens for employees who see things that are just running amok? Do they have a safe place to go? And not to the LA Times, not to the OCC, but is there a culture that is being established? I know you're eliminating some of your sales goals, which have unintended consequences as well, but is there a culture being established where the average employee feels empowered, encouraged to come forward and speak and be heard in Wells Fargo?
Senator Scott, I really appreciate that line of questioning because it's absolutely, and I should have mentioned it, each team member no matter where you are in the organization, is encouraged to raise their hand if something is being asked of them that they think is not right, not consistent with our values and our culture. They're asked to raise their hand. They're asked to go to a manager's manager in HR. We also have an anonymous ethics line. They can speak up and show us and talk to us about anything we want. We want to hear from them because we don't want this behavior. And I wish, you know, we would not have this behavior, but we've also instituted some things today, you know, and you mentioned getting rid of the sales goals, but we also today have an email we send within an hour of opening an account. No account can get opened today on a deposit side or a credit card without a signature. And we're also doing a big mystery shopping program by independent third party to help tie it together.
This is important for me to finish my line of questions. I'm glad to hear that you're making progress. Mr. Chairman, I would love for the record to have a better understanding of the culture of checks and balances that were not there, that are now there, that will help customers. Okay. Thousands of customers throughout South Carolina have more confidence in all financial institutions, and perhaps having done it wrong, you become a model for doing it right.
Thank you.
The second question I have, it goes back to the question that we've heard from Crapo, from Tester, and so many others, and Donnelly as well. When you look at the impact on the consumer,
correct,
the customer, you open an account. I apologize now for going over my time for a minute or so. You have an account. I have a couple with the bank.
Thank you.
I hope to keep them there.
Thank you. We agree.
I hope to keep them there.
Yes.
Someone opens an account, fraudulent account. The definition of fraudulent, God bless Black's dictionary. If I didn't sign for it, it's fraudulent.
Okay.
I like that simple definitions.
Okay.
Someone opens an account in my name. I don't know the account's open. So there are fees attached to some of the accounts. The fees that are attached aren't paid because I'm ignorant of those accounts. Those fees that are not paid because I don't know about them at some point is reported to a credit agency because I didn't pay the fees, because I didn't know about it, because I didn't open the account. So when these fees that creates a negative impact on my credit statement, it translates into higher interest rates, or said differently, a different way of exacting resources out of my very limited pocket, especially for folks working paycheck to paycheck throughout South Carolina.
Correct.
So when that happens, it is nearly impossible for us to figure out the actual dollar amount, as Senator Donnelly was looking for, of impact on all the customers that goes through. And I would like for it also to be included in the questions for the record, some way of helping me and others understand how we create a solution for those customers who will obviously be identified by you or by a group of attorneys looking to sue. So I would love to understand and appreciate that process so that I can go back to my constituents who I work for and give them a plausible path forward for actual resolution for those who are injured, and a clear path forward for restoring confidence in financial institutions. Because my fear is that this is not going to simply be a Wells Fargo question. It will be a question for the entire financial footprint in our nation.
And I think it's a good point, and I think, and again, I'll need to check with our team, but I think we've already gone back on the deposit side and made those fixes with the credit bureau and are working to rectify that. But I'll make sure we get back to you on work with you on that issue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Heidi Count.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this meeting. I know, Mr. Stumpf, there's probably many other places you'd rather be right now. But I think this is a critical time as we look at the push that we've seen from so many financial institutions for lower regulatory burdens and trust us. What we've now lost has been trust not only between you and your customers, but between, in a very bipartisan way, between this committee and large financial institutions. You have said repeatedly that one of your failures was that you did not act fast enough. Today you're sitting in front of this committee and I'm telling you, you are still not acting fast enough. You still do not have the answers that we need to say that we're moving forward. And so let's start with remediation, and by that I mean repairing credit ratings, taking a look at refunds, taking a look at restoring the customer what the customer lost. You have said repeatedly to the folks here, you know, we're working on it. We're working on it. You know, we start this story as far back as we don't know, but let's start at 11. Mm-hmm. At 11, there's something going on and Wells Fargo is addressing it. At 13, there's something going on and Wells Fargo is addressing it. At 15, there's something going on and Wells Fargo is addressing it. But yet, it didn't get done. And now you're coming to us and saying, trust us. We now get it. Now we know. Now we figured it out. And so we need a clear dialogue. But I think that one of the failures today is you haven't come with a whole lot of remediation. You haven't come with a whole lot of dialogue to us on this is what we're doing to restore customer confidence. And like Senator Scott, I'm one of your customers. My whole family is. You aren't doing what you need to do to restore customer confidence, but you're also not doing what you need to do to restore confidence with this committee and with the American public. I want to talk about changing culture. There is no one on this committee who believes that 5,000 people independently act with impunity and with dishonesty. No one here believes that. And if they do, I've done law enforcement. This is a behavior that was created by the culture that was allowed, created by a whole lot of folks saying, you know, let's do it this way. That this is not, and I get what you're saying, that it wasn't just the tellers, it wasn't just the lower level. But yet, the one person who was responsible directly, other than yourself, for making sure this doesn't happen isn't in front of this committee today. In fact, she's walked off with a pretty good deal and hoping that all of this blows over. And the other thing, when you say you didn't act quickly enough, the board should have already acted to claw back those salaries. If you had come here and said, the board now is clawing back, these are the things that we're doing, and you would be in a lot better position sitting in that chair right now. And so I will tell you, you have not done enough to restore confidence today. And this dialogue will continue with this committee and with the American public. Now, with that said, I want to turn to the 5,000 people. And I want to say maybe they deserve to have their reputation restored. Maybe they deserve to not be that person whose now resume says fired on a resume. Maybe instead of just focusing on your customers, you ought to focus on the 5,000 people who I'm pretty sure did not unilaterally decide to be dishonest. And so it's an issue that hasn't been raised here, but I think it's a critical issue, because when you punish the guy at the end of the line and you don't punish in any way someone at the top, we end up with an attitude that, quite frankly, this is a corporate culture that doesn't care. They're just trying to get through the day. And I don't think that your day yet has ended. And so I want to thank you for appearing, but it's not enough. And it's not nearly what I had hoped you would come with today.
Okay.
Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Stumpf. Good morning.
Good morning.
As I understand the circumstances, the factual circumstances, many of the problems, while they were system-wide, many of the problems were focused in the Los Angeles area within your banking system. Is that true?
It's true that that's the largest part of our business, but they were also focused there, yes.
And have you analyzed sufficiently to determine what was different about Los Angeles than places elsewhere in your banking system that would suggest that the number of times, the volume of fraudulent acts that occurred there, how do you explain that?
Well, as Senator Heitkamp said, and if I did not share this, I want to make sure, I also agree, 5,000 people just don't do 5,000 random things all on their own. I'm sure there were people talking to one another within a branch and so forth, but that analytical work is being done and has been done. I don't happen to have it here. I'll have our team work with your staff to make sure that you have whatever you need on that.
I would welcome that. I'm interested in knowing if you see this as a customer issue, a more vulnerable population of banking customers, or as the word culture has been used here a number of times, was there something different about Los Angeles, which I assume, again, I think illegal behavior, immoral behavior, breaking the rules is wrong wherever it happens. But our goal in management, your management of a financial institution, is to diminish the chances of that happening. So you never condone bad behavior, but we want to make certain that the circumstances in which it is discouraged and never encouraged. And I don't have a feel for that circumstance. I don't know what really is the facts within the banking leadership that may have encouraged this behavior. We've seen this before. I serve and have, with a number of my colleagues, including Senator Brown, on the Veterans Committee, where we saw the consequences of a system that rewarded appointments for veterans who needed medical care.
Correct.
We saw a scandal across the country in which veterans were put on a list suggesting they had an appointment. They didn't. In the circumstances in which those individuals were listed as having an appointment, the allegation certainly exists that there was death as a result of the failure of a VA system to provide necessary health care.
Correct.
I think a point that Senator Heitkamp made, I would make to you again. There's a number of us on this committee and in Congress who work to try to find the right regulatory balance for financial institutions. Mm-hmm. And just to stress with you the importance of then having our financial institutions behave, their behavior, conduct be a certain level. Otherwise, it undermines the efforts for that attempt to change the regulatory environment for financial success. And we particularly focus that on community banks, but we care about those financial institutions that have a relationship with their customers. And one of the arguments that has been made is those relationship bankers can rely upon the relationship. And what we're hearing from the circumstance that we find at Wells Fargo is that relationship was taken advantage of. It didn't accrue to the benefit of the customer.
And Senator, you are right for that portion. And what hurts so much is that we spend so much time trying to do the right thing. And when a customer gets a product that's not used or not benefiting them, that hurts them and it hurts us. We have no interest. And if I could just take 1 second, I want to correct, Mr. Chairman, or share something that I wasn't as clear on. On deposit account fees, none of those were reported to credit bureaus. So the credit bureau impact relates exclusively to credit cards, and we're going to run each one of those down. Thank you.
Mr. Stumpf, let me ask a final question. So I don't think you provided us with a precise time frame in which regulators were notified, but I'd be interested in knowing what regulators were notified, when, who, and what steps they then took as regulators in response to the information they had.
Okay, and again, my recollection is that our prudential regulator, the OCC, was involved and notified and active in the 2013 timeframe. At about the time of the lawsuit from the City of Los Angeles, we informed the CFPB. And so I can tell you what we did. And I know you have a panel later with them, but that's what what my
None of these actions at Wells Fargo came to light as a result of the regulators finding that behavior. It was reported to them subsequent. Is that true?
You know, I want to be, I don't want to speak for them, and I don't know what part of this is confidential supervisory information, but my recollection of what we did was deal with this issue, terminate people, inform our prudential regulator, and after the City of LA, inform the CFPB.
Finally, I would say that my experience in dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs in their circumstance, in way too many instances, in my view, the employees became the scapegoat for what I saw as actions or encouragement behavior by their supervisors. And I would encourage in your circumstance to make certain that the employees are not the scapegoat for behavior at higher levels.
I think that's a great point, Senator, and I am, you know, the 268,000 that come to work every day of our team members, they're the most fabulous people, you know, and I just love them and what they do. But the 5,300, for whatever reason, they were dishonest, and I'm not scapegoating, but that is not part of our culture. And some of those jobs, many of those jobs, most of them, were very good American jobs.
Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you. Mr. Stumpf, did Wells Fargo create a pressure cooker sales culture that put personal bankers and tellers in an impossible situation between a rock and a hard place?
I do not believe that, because 90, you know, the vast majority.
Let me continue.
Okay.
You got your answer. Thank you. So Rita Marilla, a branch manager, says regional bosses required hourly conferences on her Florida branch's progress toward daily quotas for opening accounts and selling customers extras, such as overdraft protection, an issue that hasn't been addressed yet. Employees who lagged behind had to stay late and work weekends. Then came the threats. Anyone falling short after 2 months would be fired. We were constantly told we'd be working for McDonald's. If we did not make the sales quotas, we had to stay for after-school detention, it felt like, or report to a call session on Saturdays. Is that a pressure culture situation, putting tellers and personal bankers in an impossible situation?
Senator, that has no place in our culture. I've actually read that, and it hurt to hear those words, and people like that do not belong here.
Eric Estrada, former Wells personal banker and business specialist, said managers coached workers on how to inflate sales number. Employees opened duplicate accounts, sometimes without customers' knowledge. They used a database to identify customers who had been pre-approved for credit cards and ordered them. They were coached on it. Is that a setting in which a pressure cooker culture really puts the personal bankers in an impossible situation?
That has no place in Wells Fargo. There's nothing that we did to encourage that.
Nothing you did, but bank managers were being coached on how to coach their employees on how to do this. How about a branch manager in the Pacific Northwest, where I come from? She was very upset finding employers had talked to homeless women and opening 6 checking accounts. She said, it's all manipulation. We are taught exactly how to sell multiple accounts. It sounds good, but in reality, it doesn't benefit most customers. Or let's talk about Yesenia Guitron, who in 2008, after being hired for 2 months, found that this was happening, these false accounts were happening. She went to her trainer, then she went to her manager, and she was basically found, she was pushed very hard to shut up in all kinds of different ways. So you say, well, the employee could have gone to somebody. She did. And eventually she filed a whistleblower suit. And why did Wells Fargo say that that was not legitimate? I'll just save you the time. The answer is because Wells Fargo said we fired her because she didn't meet her quotas. So here we have a situation where employees are written up, they have to stay late, they have to come in on weekends to be coached, they're at risk of being fired. That sounds like a systemic management strategy for cross-selling. But you refuse to take any responsibility, blaming it on the personal ethics of individual employees who were at risk of losing their job if they didn't meet their, quote, daily solutions target. Can you even conceivably place yourself in the position of an ordinary working person, has a child in daycare, They're told they're going to be fired if they don't meet these solutions. They're being coached on how to do it by their manager, and say that there was no culture established that caused these problems?
Sir, Senator, I am very sorry that that happened. That was not what we wanted to have happen. When those things happened, I wish we would have rooted all of it out, and the vast majority of our people did it the right way.
Sheriff Kellogg said the branch managers were always asking, how many solutions, that's signing up new accounts, did you sell today? They wanted 3 to 4 a day. In my mind, that was crazy. That's not how people's financial lives work. I was always getting written up for failing to bump up my solutions numbers. Some employees would ask local business owners who they knew well to open additional accounts as favors to them. It seems as though you'd have to be fully ignorant to believe that these goals are achievable through any other means. Cross-selling is a major pride point for the management of Wells Fargo, including your reports to annual reports to customers. It was so high because you created a culture of cross-selling that pushed everyone to the maximum. And the casualties are these folks who were going to be fired because they'd lose their jobs if they didn't meet it. And yet you can only sit here and say there was no coaching, there was no management strategy. Cost-selling was at the heart of Wells Fargo's program, and you were at the top of this for a very long time. Let's go back to 2005, 2007, 2010. You had one major position and promotion after another. Cross-selling was the heart of it, and you just sit here and blame the little person who was pressured into an impossible situation. Isn't that really kind of, for want of another word, a failure to accept responsibility?
Senator, I started out today by accepting full responsibility. We like the idea of
accepting full responsibility for establishing a culture that put people in an impossible situation would be to resign, as my colleague suggested.
Wow.
It would be to return your funds and help fund assistance for all these people who were fired because of the culture you established and that you personally benefit an enormous amount from. But all you say, I accept responsibility, and by the way, it's the fault of those 5,000 people who just weren't ethical enough and open an account they shouldn't have opened. That's not accepting responsibility. This was a systemic problem that you benefited from enormously, the bank benefited from enormously, and you are scapegoating the people at the very bottom.
Senator, I don't want to be confrontational, but I want to just tell you that the vast majority did the right thing. We love the idea of having deep, mutually beneficial relationships with our customers. Having a product that a customer does not use, does not need, or does not want does not help the customer, it does not help me, and it does not help the shareholder.
You signed Sarbanes-Oxley reports. Did you ever reveal the problems with this high-pressure sales strategy in terms of fraudulent credit accounts anytime in that course towards 2 million fraudulent accounts? Did you ever disclose that to your investors?
Well, let me just say...
Well, yes or no?
Well, Senator,
it's a simple question.
Senator, the question is 2 million fraudulent. There was 2 million accounts that we could not rule out as a possibility that they weren't authorized.
I'm so glad you crossed that T and dotted that I. Did you ever disclose the systemic problem of fraudulent accounts to your investors?
It was not a material event.
So you bragged on the one end about the intensive ability to get cross-selling and how that would be beneficial, but the problems that came from that strategy, the very problems that dozens and dozens of people have shared their stories about how it was on the ground, and you can only blame them for ethical lapses, you never disclosed you had a systemic problem.
Again,
you signed those reports personally. That's what Sarbanes-Oxley was. Didn't you think that that was material when you're saying this is our big win, is our cross-selling strategy, not to disclose that it also had a dark side?
There was a lot of things that our customers do and a lot of businesses that we have. This is one ratio, and most of this business, first of all of the deposit accounts are off the books. Most of them went on and off within the same quarter in which they happened. Having a customer have a product that they do not need is not helpful. It's not what we want.
I'm going to close just by saying I would like to hear about the amount of slamming that went on overdraft protection, since that's come up, and a number of the employees talk about how they were pressured into adding that. Do you have details on that?
I do not.
Can you get us offensive details on that?
I don't know of that issue off the top of my head, but I'll have my staff, I'll instruct them to work with your team as quickly as they can.
Can you get the information for the full committee?
I'll have my team work with your team. I don't even know exactly what we're talking about.
You don't know what overdraft protection is?
I know what overdraft protection is. I know that we had a credit card product for an overdraft protection, but I'll have my team work with your team.
And please get the information to the full committee. Thank you.
Senator Brown, you have another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for starting a second round. I appreciate that. There's so much more to discuss. First, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the testimony in the House by Khalid Taha and Julie Miller, two people who worked at Wells Fargo.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of clarification of points and then 2 or 3 more questions, Mr. Stumpf. We've discussed who was fired, whether the employees were fired. Understand that just for those watching and listening and for the record especially, 90% of the people fired were not managers. That means they were tellers, $12 to $15 an hour, personal bankers, $16 to maybe $18 or $19 or $20 an hour, but most of the people fired were not branch managers and were not regional managers. Second, there's a mention that only credit cards would affect credit scores in the answer to one of these questions. But if funds were moved out of a checking account and someone bounced a check for a car payment, that could end up affecting credit scores. So while it may narrowly be only credit cards, it really isn't in that definition. A couple of questions. Senator Scott asked about where employees can go with ethics concerns, Mr. Stumpf. It sounded from whistleblower lawsuits that ethics complaint often resulted in confronting the very managers condoning this behavior. Is that true?
I don't believe that is true. I don't know. I can get back to you on that.
How do you register an ethics complaint other than calling CFPB or the LA County Attorney or the LA Times?
As I understand how our ethics line works, you call, it's an anonymous call, it's handled by a third party outside of the company who does work on that and then reports it to the company.
Okay, I would like more on that because my understanding is at least initially you have to confront your supervisor who has much to say about it. Now that we know what we do, will Wells Fargo continue to take the position in court that contractual agreements on mandatory arbitration, this question about mandatory arbitration, the fine print of so many of these contracts, if you will Wells Fargo continue to take the position in court that contractual agreements on mandatory arbitration covering real accounts will apply to fraudulent ones as well, and that customers will be forced into arbitration rather than having access to the courts?
Well, I've instructed our team to do whatever it takes within reason to take care of these customers. I'd have to talk to my legal team, and we can get back to you on that.
All right, understanding what has happened in the past, these mandatory arbitration clauses, which many of us I know in this committee don't think fair generally, and most consumers don't understand that they are part of a mandatory, even know what it is, and part of a mandatory, that's been applied to these fraudulent accounts in addition to the ones that were not fraudulent. Understand that's what's happened. And I hope your answer is specifically in response to that.
Yeah. Well, again, I'll talk to our team and we'll get back to you. I'm not an expert in that.
Ms. Tolstedt reported directly to you. How frequently did you talk to one another?
We had at least weekly meetings.
And from 2007, when you both took your respective roles until the end of 2013, did none of this firing for fraudulent accounts and all, did none of this ever come up in your weekly or more than weekly meetings?
I remember being at least make an impression upon me in 2013.
But from 2007, when you had your respective roles, for 6 years, regular meetings with one of your most important managers, this discussion of 1,000 people a year beginning at 11, but we may go beyond earlier than that, we think. those discussions, you have no recall that that ever came up?
Not in the way I had in 2013.
Okay. Over the past 10 years, your bank has had approximately 39 enforcement actions, just a few of which have come up today. Many were related to failure to serve or abusive conduct towards customers and investors. You talk much about Wells' culture, how proud you are of it and its ethics. What does this say? If you've had 39 enforcement actions, what does this say about Wells' culture and compliance programs?
We have more work to do, and we're trying very, very hard to build out all the compliance that we need to be, to treat customers fairly and to make sure that we do things right every day.
Last question, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence.
Senator Menendez.
Could I just do this last question? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. The people, we know about the 5,300 employees who you say committed, many people up here have said that the pressure was on them was so great that they did things that they shouldn't have, or maybe apparently. You said they all, I think you said they deserve to be fired. What about the people who got, understanding too, that's 5,300, then there were at least hundreds more who refused to cheat or quit just because they didn't want to be part of this and they saw what happened to others. But what about the people who got fired for not meeting goals that you now are saying were ill-advised? So there was a large, certainly a significant number of people who were fired for not meeting their goals. Now you say those goals were ill-advised. What do you do to make those employees, how do you identify them? How many are there, and what do you do to make those employees whole?
Yeah, I'd have to talk with our team. I don't know about those numbers. I don't know how significant or widespread that is, and I get back to you on that.
Well, will you? Well, then more precisely, I understand I expected you not to know that number, but if there is one, that's one. If there are 100 or 1,000, for those that were fired for not meeting those goals that you say are now ill-advised, do you have plans to make them whole?
Yeah, I'd have to talk to our team. Again, I don't know the numbers, and I frankly haven't worked closely with our team.
I didn't expect you to know the numbers, but does it, in your mind, and does it, in your conscience, does it say those people were fired because they didn't reach goals, the goals were ill-advised? Shouldn't you make it up to them?
Well, again, I don't even, I know where you're going with your line of question. I'm trying to be cooperative. I just haven't talked to our HR team. I don't know the numbers. I don't know the situations. I don't know if there's other things involved. So
I'm less concerned about the numbers than the morality of it. I would like to at least ask you to do this then. Once you've made that determination of how many there are, I would like you to make them whole, and if you're not willing to make them whole, I'd like a written response about why you have made the decision not to make them whole.
Okay, I'll talk to our team and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stumpf, let me give you a real-life example. We're talking about people whose credit scores were hurt. Linda Edwards and her daughter are Wells Fargo customers from New Jersey. Accounts were opened in their name without their acquiescence, knowledge, including credit cards, of her daughter who is just starting college. She has a negative consequence on her credit score, which has not been resolved by Wells Fargo. You got the wrong person when you did it to this lady, because she happened to be a former staffer at the New Jersey Division of Banking and Insurance. And when she called your company and asked for the fraud division, she says, no, don't just call customer service. So to this date, that question of her daughter's credit score, who's starting college and obviously wants a good credit score, is affected. So there's real-life people here who Wells Fargo has not responded to. Let me ask you this. Is cross-selling an industry-wide reality, as is evidenced by Wells Fargo, or is it unique to Wells Fargo?
I don't know what other companies do. I know that we view it as an important metric as it relates to depth of relationship. And relationship.
You don't know if other banks do this?
I do not know.
You don't review what your competition is doing to figure out whether there's something you should be doing. So you don't have any idea if they do cross-selling?
I do not know that.
We'll have to ask the regulators. Let me ask you this. He said it was not a material event to Senator Merkley. Not a material event?
A material financial event. This
How
is
about a
big,
material event for the SEC disclosure, which you said you never made?
You know, I'm not a lawyer, and I rely on my legal team.
Based upon what's happened to the stock for your shareholders, it definitely was a material event that should have come forward. Let me ask you this. Ms. Tolstead, in response to one of the questions, you said that you and I think the COO met with her and said you wanted to move in a different direction.
Correct.
And she decided to leave.
Hmm?
That sounds to me a lot like you can either leave or you're going to be fired, maybe. But is it that you created a situation to give her the option to leave because you were concerned about what she might say about practices in the bank and higher-ups?
In fact, when Tim Sloan, our Chief Operating Officer and President, talked with her, he said we want to go in a different direction. There were a number of things he was thinking about doing different in the business, and we had not made enough, along with my consultation, and not made enough progress here. And she was retirement eligible. She decided to retire. It never went beyond that.
You had no concerns of what she might say if brought before the Senate or any other entity and put under oath about what she might say about what was known or not known?
That didn't even come into the...
Well, let me ask you this. What were the repercussions of not meeting sales quotas besides not getting the bonus? Can you tell me how many workers faced discipline over the same 5-year period for failing to meet sales goals? How many workers that failed to meet those sales goals were terminated?
You know, I do not have those numbers, but I will tell you this, Senator.
I think it's important to know those numbers.
Yeah.
You don't know how many people you terminate. You know how many people you terminated who you said did the wrong thing, but you don't know how many people you terminated because they didn't meet the overwhelming cooker boiler that you put them under.
You know, I don't have those. I don't have those
numbers.
I'd
like you to get those numbers to the committee.
I'll talk with our team and I'll
let me
as far as I can.
You said to Senator Scott that of course there were opportunities when he asked about safe harbors. You could raise your hand. There was an anonymous ethics line. There was no pressure cooker. Now, do you read your emails, Mr. Stumpf?
I read my emails.
Okay, so I'd like to read to you an excerpt from an email one of my constituents sent to you in 2011. She was a branch manager at Wells Fargo. And I spoke to her yesterday about her experiences at Wells Fargo. In 2011, she wrote to you, I am currently, and I'm quoting now, I am currently an assistant vice president manager at and I'll leave the location out, in northern New Jersey. I have been an employee of Wachovia for over 22 years, of which Wells Fargo acquired. I'm writing to you because as a team member, I feel hurt and disappointed with this company. There are challenges that team members are faced with, but those should not be the reason to move money from one account to another and to fool the motivator, the person who you had to go to who constantly was badgering you about whether or not you had opened enough accounts, that we have new accounts. These funds that are moved to new accounts to show growth when in actuality there is no net gain to the company's deposit base is wrong. In the past months, I was placed on warning for not meeting these goals, and the reason that the bankers underneath me do not is because I will not tolerate the movement of existing money just because we need checking account solutions and profit proxy to move to the motivator. These accounts make no sense for the customer. Did you read that email?
Yeah, I don't remember that one.
Okay, well, she was fired. So much for the safe haven. So much for coming forth. She went to the president and CEO of the company. That's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
And she found no safe haven there. Finally, let me ask you this. In 2012, Wells Fargo, then and now the largest mortgage lender in the country, agreed to pay $175 million to settle accusations that the bank discriminated against African Americans and Hispanic borrowers in their mortgage lending from 2004 to 2009. An investigation by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division found that Wells Fargo discriminated by steering approximately 4,000 African American and Hispanic borrowers into subprime mortgages when non-Hispanic white borrowers with similar credit profiles received prime loans. When I look at this history, I get concerned with what's going on here. Do you have demographics of those customers who were hurt in this process, and can you share it with the committee?
Yes. Let me just go back to that particular case. I regret that that was done through a wholesale business. Other people outside of our company originated those mortgages, and we were closing them, and we shut down that division. In this case, we don't, when we take applications or when we do business for deposits and credit card, we capture age. And there was no, in fact, it skewed towards, younger to middle age Americans.
Well, I'd suggest you reach page 36D, item 36D on page 9 of the Los Angeles City Attorney's 2015 complaint filed against Wells Fargo, describing a Wells Fargo gaming practice of targeting individuals holding Mexican consular cards.
I don't, I'll look at that, yes. Thank you.
Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you. And I apologize to the witness. Been a busy morning. First, I want to just say, and I know other people have spoken about this, in terms of rescinding the bonuses, to the average American, it just seems appalling that somebody who could make such large mistakes should be rewarded to almost an obscene amount of money, $120 million. And so I would simply, I'm not going to, I know this has been discussed, I would say your bank has overall a good reputation. For the reputation of your bank, for the value of your shares, as well as relationships with customers, I would urgently urge you to not allow those bonuses to occur and urge that the compensation committee, I know which you sit on, to do that. That's just a statement for the record. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the CFPB because they have done incredible work over the past 5 years, but this case exemplifies why the CFPB was created. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was formed to ensure that financial institutions that harm consumers through unfair, deceptive, or abusive practices are held accountable, and that the consumers are made whole again. In fact, over the course of its short history, it's gotten $12 billion in relief and restitution. Today's hearing reminds us why the CFPB was formed. We needed a cop-out on the beat. The incentives and practices that cross-selling goals promoted at Wells Fargo were very, very wrong and bad, as I'm sure you've said. They infected the work environment at branches in the country, and including in New York. Beyond the financial damage, Wells Fargo's actions violated consumer trust. Wells will have to work long and hard to regain the trust of millions of Americans, but those Americans can rest assured now more than ever, knowing that there's a CFPB out there. So I would just ask you, Mr. Stumpf, given what you've been through, and I know it's not been a pleasant experience, do you agree that federal regulators like CFPB and OCC serve a valuable role in promoting safety and stability as well as necessary consumer protections? I'm saying this because a lot of our friends on the other side of the aisle want to either get rid of or greatly reduce the power of the CFPB.
We share the mission of all of our regulators created by Congress, including the CFPB, and we're working with all of them.
So you think the CFPB is a necessary thing?
Well, it's created by Congress, and we agree to work with all of them, and we work closely on this matter with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you believe that the reforms, I'll let the answer speak for itself. We think the CFPB has done an outstanding job, and what's happened at the bank, whether, however it happened, shows the need for it. Okay. You believe that the reforms that Wells committed to and goals required under the consent agreement you signed with the CFPB will allow Wells to go back on a path of protecting customers' interests and putting consumers first?
Yes, we believe it, but we have a lot of work to do.
Okay. As per the terms of the consent agreement, will you work with the CFPB to ensure that Wells's customers that were negatively impacted are made whole?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Were you aware that the CFPB was aware of the cross-selling and looking into concerns about cross-selling as early as 2013?
I only know what we did. I don't know what the CFPB.
Okay, they were. So they were on this case, I think, before
at least your top management discovered this, which is to their credit.
I don't know that.
Okay. Okay, well, Director Cordray will be here in a little bit, so we'll ask him and see if that was the case. I believe it to be the case. And finally, do you believe that the actions taken by the CFPB here will lead to other financial institutions to reevaluate and reconsider their own cross-selling practices?
Yeah, I'd have no idea on that.
Yeah, I think they will. I think they will, and I think the CFPB has had a very salutary influence, and I'd hope you'd come around to the view that it's a necessary part of our system of banking and governing. Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I just might make one comment. Thank you, Senator Schumer, for your questions. You made a comment that I'm on the Human Resources and Compensation Committee. I am not. I just want to make sure that's part of the record.
Okay. Well, I would still urge you to recommend. Is that the committee, though, that's in charge of the bonuses?
That's the one that makes the recommendation to the full board, and of course, I'm not part of the full board in those decisions.
Okay. I would urge you to urge everybody who is on these committees to do just what we had asked.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say again, thank you very much for being so responsive to us, for holding this hearing when we sent you a letter to ask you to do it. And thank you for being so generous about time.
Responsive to the American people.
I hope so, too.
Not just to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your holding this hearing.
Yeah.
Mr. Stumpf, as you know, some of my colleagues and I sent you a letter last week about the board's plans to claw back compensation from senior executives who were responsible for overseeing this scam. Wells Fargo provided us with a response yesterday. I noticed that although we sent the letter to you, that the response actually came from somebody else in the company, which I guess is another example of holding yourself accountable. I want to focus now on the mysterious circumstances surrounding Carrie Tolsted's retirement in July. As you know, Ms. Tolsted ran the community banking division, the division where this scam occurred, for the entire time that the scam took place. She was in charge of all of the 5,300 employees who were fired, and she oversaw the creation of 2 million fake accounts. Now, in July of this year, just 2 months before the settlement was announced, and before those facts became public, Ms. Tolsted retired at age 56. You indicated in the letter, responding to our letter, that she walks away with over $90 million in stock options, and awards. Fortune magazine says it's actually about $125 million. But, and here's the key part, according to Fortune, if Ms. Tolsted had been fired instead of retiring, she would have had to forfeit as much as $45 million of that award. Mr. Stumpf, the response to our letter confirms that you knew of this scandal before Ms. Tolsted retired. It said, and this is from your letter, quote, senior management and the board were aware of the pending litigation, investigation, and discussions with our regulators relating to sales practices when Ms. Tolsted indicated her decision to retire. Is that accurate, Mr. Stumpf, what this letter says? Were you personally aware of the massive problem that occurred under Ms. Tolsted's watch in July when she announced her retirement?
I was aware of that. We were involved in discussions with the city attorney, the OCC, and the CFPB, yes.
So you had some indication there was a massive problem.
We had some indication that we had 1% of our people who were doing the wrong thing.
Also known as a massive problem.
Well,
if you knew this, did you consider firing Ms. Tolsted before she retired?
Well, at the time, she was reporting to our president and chief operating officer.
It's a simple question. No, you knew there was a problem. Did you consider firing her?
No, because of her full...
Seriously? You found out that one of your divisions had created 2 million fake accounts, had fired thousands of employees for improper behavior, and had cheated thousands of your own customers, and you didn't even once consider firing her ahead of her retirement?
Well, in fact, when I look at her full body of work, and I look at the customer loyalty improvement and the customer service improvement...
Are you sure that those were not fake?
All the work that was done, she chose to retire. And I'd also like to make one other comment, because you made the...
So you, no, I'm just on this. You never considered firing her. So now Ms. Tolstead has apparently retired, but is also staying with the firm through the end of the year. And in the response to our letter, you state, or the person writing it states, quote, Ms. Tolstead is eligible to be considered for a 2016 annual incentive award. An incentive award for doing a great job in 2016? Mr. Stumpf, that is unbelievable. You are the chairman of the board and the CEO. In those roles, do you think it would be appropriate for Ms. Tolstead to get another bonus on top of the millions that she has already gotten as a reward for her role in this massive scam?
The board will consider that. I don't want to prejudice the board, but I also want to make one comment.
I don't understand that answer. You know, you and your board have already made changes. You've made changes to the compensation scheme for thousands of employees. You've sat here today and talked about that. You've removed sales quotas, I think you told us. You've reformed incentives. Why can that be done quick as a wink across the entire bank? But a question about cutting compensation for a highly placed executive who oversaw a massive fraud takes long deliberation? Why is that?
Because there's a board governance process, and we want that to work properly. And whether Carrie was retired or she was fired, there'd be no difference with respect to how the board can deal with that.
I'm sorry, if she was fired, it is my understanding she would not be entitled to large parts of her compensation. It's not just a clawback issue. We're talking about she doesn't get them to begin with if she gets fired, but you let her walk out of the door with a retirement. I don't quite understand. How do you explain this to your own shareholders?
There is a process that the board goes through, and they will do that. They've already met, and we won't give that.
I don't understand. You keep saying there's, you know, the board, as if these are strangers that you met in a dark alley. Under the bylaws of Wells Fargo, and I'm quoting here, the chairman shall preside at all meetings of the board. And you were able to make changes. Why can you not make a change here?
I'm not on the Human Resources Committee of the board. They have their own governance and structure. We want that to proceed in the process in which we have.
All right. So we'll do this your way. Our letter asked a number of questions about clawbacks of Ms. Tolstead's and other executives' pay, including yours. Mm-hmm. Wells Fargo's answer to our letter was just basically you punted, that the decision would be up to the board, the same punt you've given here. So you're the chairman of the board. Let me ask it this way. Will you personally support clawing back all or part of Ms. Tolstead's pay?
I'm not going to, in any way, try to influence or prejudice the board as they do their deliberation.
So you have absolutely no opinion on this?
I'm not going to opine on that.
You're not going to opine on it. You're going to say, get out there, defraud, cheat, lie, steal, and I have nothing to say about whether or not you ought to still be getting your bonus.
I've never said, and we'd never say as our company go out there and do any of those things. We try to do the right thing.
But you say if you do them, you can count on Chairman Stumpf not to stand up and say you shouldn't get your incentive bonus. I think you started this whole thing by saying, don't tell me what you say, tell me what your actions are. And your actions are, people do this and you're not going to take a single step to shut it down. So I guess I can ask this question again. Will you personally support clawing back any or all of the pay for the person in charge of compliance, someone we haven't talked about much today, the person who is supposed to be responsible to make sure that the bank is following the law? Will you have any recommendation about that person?
I'm going to have the board do their process.
You are going to have no recommendation at all, ever, at any point in this process?
Whatever the board accepts, and whatever they do, I will accept and I will support.
You are not passive here. If you have nothing to do, then what are you doing serving as chairman of the board? If you have no opinions on the most massive fraud that has hit this bank since the beginning of time, how can it be that you actually get to continue to collect a paycheck for being chairman of the board?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the fact this is a massive fraud. But secondly, the board will do their work, and I'm not going to prejudice their work. And I'll accept whatever they come up with, and I will be supportive.
You know, you accepted all along, as this fraud built up, this massive fraud, you accepted all of the performance bonuses based on the cross-selling that is at the heart of this. You watched your own stock go up by more than $200 million, based in part on exactly this massive fraud. You got out and you pumped it to Wall Street, and you said to Wall Street, hey, we are doing such a great job cross-selling here at Wells Fargo. You should tell everybody to buy our stock. And now you turn around and say, I shall remain passive and simply accept what Wells Fargo wants to do. You know, in 2008, Wall Street promised change, but it looks like it is business as usual. A giant bank cheats the little guys, and the executives line their own pockets. Mr. Stumpf, you make it clear that Wall Street won't change until we make it change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Stumpf, thank you for appearing today. We have some questions for the record. We have another panel.
Okay.
I hope you will answer these questions for the record. We have a number of them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next panel, we will hear from Mr. Jim Clark, the Chief Deputy for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, whose office brought the 2015 case against Wells Fargo. Next, we will hear from Mr. Curry, the Comptroller of the Currency, Wells Fargo's prudential regulator, and then we will hear from Director Cordray of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Gentlemen, we appreciate all of you. We appreciate your patience today. We've had a very important and lengthy hearing. Mr. Clark, we will start with you, but all of you's written testimony will be made part of the record in its entirety. You start. Microphone. Hit the mic.
There we go. Sorry about that. Chairman Shelby, Ranking Member Brown, esteemed members of the committee, I'm Jim Clark, the Chief Deputy City Attorney of the City of Los Angeles. I'm appearing on behalf of our City Attorney, Mike Feuer, who submitted written testimony but could not be with us today. I would like to tell you briefly what our office did and why, what we discovered, and the relief for consumers we sought and obtained. On a Sunday morning in December of 2013, Angelenos opened the Los Angeles Times to find a shocking story by a Times reporter, Scott Record. The story described Wells Fargo Bank's sales culture and the harm that culture had caused its customers. The story read in part, to meet quotas, employees have opened unneeded accounts for customers, ordered credit cards without customers' permission, and forged client signatures on paperwork. Some employees begged family members to open ghost accounts. Our city attorney, like thousands of other California consumers, was appalled by what he read and immediately convened a meeting of key lawyers in our office to begin an investigation of the allegations of the story and to determine if an action can be brought by our office under the California laws designed to protect consumers against unfair business practices. California's consumer protection laws do not afford our office pre-litigation subpoena powers, so our investigation essentially consisted of good old-fashioned detective work. We conducted dozens of interviews with current and former Wells Fargo employees and customers, pored over public documents, including court documents that were records of wrongful termination suits brought by terminated Wells Fargo employees. And we went to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and FTC consumer complaint databases. We found that the bank had victimized consumers by opening customer accounts and issuing credit cards and other products without the customer's knowledge or authorization. Our investigation revealed that the bank had failed to notify consumers once these unauthorized accounts had been opened and had not refunded fees for those unwanted products and services once the misconduct had been detected. We found instances in which the bank made it difficult, if not impossible, for customers to receive accurate information as to what exactly had happened to them. Many consumers were told that the unauthorized accounts would be closed. However, often that wasn't the case. We also found that Wells Fargo's business model imposed unrealistic quotas on its salespeople, which incentivized employees to engage in highly aggressive sales tactics, creating a perfect storm for the unlawful activities we discovered. Our investigation consumed some 16 months and culminated on May 4th of 2015 with our filing of a civil enforcement action in the name of the people of the state of California. That proceeding sought relief for consumers harmed by Wells Fargo's conduct, and equally important, was intended to put a stop to the illegal practices Wells Fargo had employed. In the days following our lawsuit, our office received calls, letters, and emails from more than 1,000 Wells Fargo customers and current and former employees. They described a veritable litany of horrific experiences. The consumers had money withdrawn to their authorized account to pay fees assessed by Wells Fargo to their unauthorized accounts. They complained that their unauthorized accounts were sent to debt collection agencies and derogatory notes were placed on their credit reports. From the Wells employees, we learned of the perverse sales incentives Wells used and the extreme pressure placed upon employees to achieve often unrealistic sales quotas. In short, what we learned both before and after we filed our case was not only that Wells Fargo's conduct was inexcusable, but that it also seemed to be systemic and widespread. Earlier this month, we reached a settlement with Wells Fargo, which, in conjunction with the resolutions reached by the federal agencies represented here today, provides for comprehensive remediation and corrective actions, and sends a strong message to Wells and its customers by imposing a $50 million penalty, the largest in the history of our office. Our agreement first establishes a complaint and mediation system for California consumers harmed by the bank's practices, and also requires Wells to continue a restitution program for those customers negatively affected by the practices. Wells Fargo also must alert all of its California customers who have consumer or business checking or savings accounts, credit cards, unsecured lines of credit to visit their local bank or call Wells Fargo to review their accounts, close accounts, discontinue services they don't want to resolve any remaining problems. And crucially, for the next 2 years, every 6 months, Wells Fargo must provide our office with audit reports signed by an officer or director of the bank under penalty of perjury, assessing the bank's compliance with our agreement. It's critical to note that our settlement was coordinated with the enforcement efforts of our federal partners, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. As a result, remediation and corrective actions now extend nationwide. We'd like to thank both agencies for their outstanding work. In our view, robust government oversight is crucial to protecting consumers, and when federal, state, and local enforcement agencies collaborate and coordinate their efforts, protections consumers need and are entitled to are much more likely to be effective. There's a sacred trust that consumers put in their financial institutions, a faith that their hard-earned money will be safe and secure, and that all of their bank's actions will meet the highest ethical standards. Wells Fargo broke that trust. It cannot be allowed to happen again. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Shelby, Ranking Member Brown, and members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing related to the unsafe and unsound sales practices at Wells Fargo. Let me begin by stating clearly that the sales practices at Wells Fargo involving employees opening unwanted accounts and making unauthorized transfers of customer funds, even temporarily, are outrageous. These practices, driven by misplaced incentives and enabled by weak risk management and controls, undermine the fundamental trust that goes to the heart of the bank-customer relationship. They are unacceptable and have no place in the federal banking system. The OCC's September 8th enforcement action builds on examination work that identified weaknesses in compliance risk management and consumer protection, and subsequently focused on sales practices beginning in January 2014. The action requires Wells Fargo to pay a $35 million penalty to the United States Treasury, orders the bank to reimburse affected customers, and directs comprehensive corrective action to prevent such practices in the future. OCC examiners are closely monitoring the bank's corrective action and its reimbursement of harmed customers. Our work on this matter continues. I have ordered agency staff to review individual misconduct and culpability in this case. I have also directed our examiners to review the sales practices at all the large and mid-sized banks we supervise and assess the sufficiency of controls with respect to sales practices. As we continue to review this matter, more facts may come to light. My written testimony provides further details about the OCC's supervision of Wells Fargo leading to our enforcement action. The actions the OCC took, together with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Los Angeles City Attorney, rightfully hold the bank accountable and require necessary corrective action. However, I believe the OCC can and must do better. To that end, I have asked my Senior Deputy Comptroller for Enterprise Governance to conduct a post-mortem to identify potential gaps in our supervision, and I will address any identified gaps. Enforcement actions such as these require thousands of hours of examination and investigation work. I want to express my appreciation for the OCC staff who worked tirelessly on this issue, as well as our colleagues at the CFPB and the LA City Attorney's Office. The coordination in this case allowed us to take collective action that addressed the safety and soundness and the consumer protection aspects of the bank's deficiencies. Together, the orders demonstrate that such practices will not be tolerated. Since I became comptroller, I have worked to strengthen our supervisory effectiveness, including through the 2014 adoption and implementation of heightened risk governance standards for our largest institutions. These enforceable guidelines emphasize the importance of 3 lines of defense in the detection and mitigation of risk: frontline business units, independent risk management, and internal audit, as well as the vital role of the board in providing a credible challenge to management actions. Had these structural elements been functioning properly, they would have prevented the type of abuses we have witnessed at Wells Fargo. The continued application of OCC's heightened standards for large banks will help ensure that they have the governance and controls necessary to prevent these sorts of practices in the future. The practices at the bank also demonstrate the importance of aligning incentives with appropriate behavior, which highlights the need to finalize the interagency incentive compensation rule sooner rather than later. As proposed, the rule would provide clear direction regarding the application of sound incentive compensation programs, including clawbacks, forfeiture, and other mechanisms to hold senior executives and other employees with significant responsibilities accountable. For those reasons, I support prompt completion of the final rule. Again, thank you for holding this important hearing today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Mr. Cordray.
Thank you, Chairman Shelby, Ranking Member Brown, and members of the committee. I will briefly discuss 1, what our investigations found about the sales practices at Wells Fargo, 2, what we're seeking to achieve by our order, and 3, some thoughts about further steps to improve the culture and practices of the banking industry. On September 8th, the Consumer Bureau, together with our partners at this table, took an enforcement action against Wells Fargo Bank. Our investigations found that in order to meet sales goals and collect bonuses for themselves, Bank employees created unauthorized deposit and credit card accounts, enrolled consumers in online banking services, and ordered debit cards for consumers, all without their consent or even their knowledge. Some of these practices involved fake email accounts and phony PIN numbers. The fraudulent conduct occurred on a massive scale. As detailed in our order, Wells Fargo opened at least $1.5 million deposit accounts that may not have been authorized, including transferring funds from some customer accounts without their knowledge or consent. Wells Fargo also initiated applications for more than 500,000 credit card accounts that may not have been authorized by using consumers' information without their knowledge or consent. These activities caused some consumers to incur fees, and even apart from that, they represent a staggering breach of trust and conduct that should never occur at any bank. Wells Fargo has demonstrated the epic scope of its failures by terminating at least 5,300 people thus far, including branch managers and managers of managers. The gravity and breadth of the fraud that occurred at Wells Fargo cannot be pushed aside as the stray misconduct of just a few bad apples. As one former federal prosecutor has aptly noted, the stunning nature and scale of these practices reflects instead the consequences of a diseased orchard. As our order identifies, Wells Fargo built and refined an incentive compensation program and implemented sales goals to boost the cross-selling of products, but did so in a way that made it possible for its employees to pursue unfair and abusive sales practices. And I have a question for you. Do we really believe that 5,300 people applied for jobs with Wells Fargo over the years, intending and expecting and wanting that they were going to go into the bank and abuse consumers' trust and open phony accounts in their name? No, it was the Wells Fargo culture that made that happen. It appears that the bank did not monitor its program carefully, allowing thousands of employees to game the system and inflate their sales figures to meet their sales targets and claim higher bonuses under extreme pressure. Rather than put its customers first, Wells Fargo built and sustained a cross-selling program where the bank and many of its employees served themselves instead, violating the basic ethics of a banking institution, including the key norm of trust. Our order accomplishes several things. First, the details in the order that are the result of our investigation expose Wells Fargo's illegal misconduct, including its scale, for all to see for themselves. It has spawned vigorous public scrutiny over the past 2 weeks that no doubt will continue. Second, the order helps answer one question many of you have asked me from time to time. What does the term abusive mean in our governing statute? Although we've been careful in analyzing all the ramifications of that new term, we did not hesitate for a minute to apply it emphatically to what we found here. In this matter, Wells Fargo engaged in abusive conduct toward its customers and consumers. We have said so, and executives, shareholders will now have to consider what that means in their own efforts to address their cultures and practices going forward. Third, we have ensured that all consumers who suffered financial harm as a result of these practices will be fully compensated for that harm. Wells Fargo is required to set aside $5 million to cover all of that, and if it turns out to exceed $5 million, and it now appears we're going to go back further years, the bank will cover that as well. Fourth, we fined Wells Fargo $100 million, the largest fine that the Consumer Bureau has imposed on any financial company to date. That is a dramatic amount as compared to the actual financial harm to consumers, but it is justified here by the outrageous and abusive nature of these fraudulent practices on such an enormous scale. Some have said maybe this is not enough. Some have said it's too much. As for whether we've done enough here, it is notable that the order itself is generating considerable consequences, including market effects, shareholder activity, further potential lawsuits, and follow-up investigations by other public officials that may be either civil or criminal in nature. Fifth, the order requires independent consultants to be installed at Wells Fargo to ensure that all consumers are fully compensated and that changes in sales practices are fully implemented so this misconduct does not recur. The top executives at Wells Fargo and its board of directors will be directly engaged in this work. If the independent consultants identify any further issues or concerns, and they may, we will address those as well. Let me conclude with some more general concerns. As one of the biggest and best-known banks in the United States, Wells Fargo is in a position to lead by example in terms of how every bank should treat its customers. In the wake of this order, it now must do so. Much bank growth these days occurs by cross-selling customers on more products and services. There's a right way to do that, which should lead banks to focus on strong customer service that produces high levels of customer satisfaction, which in turn generates repeat business from existing customers and positive word of mouth to others. There's also a wrong way to do that. As we've seen here, unchecked incentives and an unrealistic and uncaring culture of high-pressure sales targets can lead to serious consumer harm. Incentive compensation structures are common in businesses, and they can motivate positive behavior. Yet companies need to pay close attention to their compliance monitoring systems in order to prevent violations of the law and abusive practices. This action should serve notice to the entire industry. If sales targets and incentive compensation schemes are implemented in ways that threaten harm to consumers and lead to violations of the law, then banks and other financial companies will be held accountable. We've seen the risks such programs pose across the entire financial sector. We've dealt with it in debt collection, mortgage origination, credit card add-on products, and now here, and we will continue to take action to protect consumers. Thank you again to our partners here at this table. I'm proud of our team and their teams who worked with us on this important enforcement action, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank all three. Mr. Clark, I'll start with you. The L.A. City Attorney efforts, very important here.
Thank you, Steve.
I applaud your efforts on this case by, as you said, engaging in good old-fashioned detective work. And I just want to clarify the facts as I understand them and for the record from your written testimony. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will, Mr.
A dozen or so attorneys in your office, the L.A. City Attorney's Office, without subpoena power, conducted numerous interviews with former Wells Fargo employees, met with aggrieved victims, poured over public records, including voluminous court records from wrongful termination lawsuits, searching for victims to uncover fraud. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
Other than accessing the CFPB's consumer complaint database, your first contact with the CFPB or the OCC, Office of Comptroller of the Currency, did not come until after your lawsuit was filed in May of 2015. Was that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Cordray, the CFPB's efforts. In your written testimony, sir, you state that Wells Fargo opened over 1.5 million deposit accounts that may not have been authorized. That's a lot of accounts.
That's the facts we found through our investigation.
Is that
Yes.
number based on PwC's PricewaterhouseCoopers analysis?
It's based on our investigation, and there were internal documents Wells Fargo provided that confirmed and were consistent with what we found through our investigation.
In your written testimony, you state that Wells Fargo also initiated applications for over 500,000 credit card accounts that may not have been authorized. And does that come from internal analysis? Or
Yeah, these are staggering numbers. That's what we found through our investigation, which included civil investigative demands, disclosure of tremendous amounts of documents from Wells Fargo, investigative testimony, and working with our partners here and their staffs to uncover as much as we could.
Also in your written testimony, you described your engagement with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, and you just a few minutes ago did, as a partnership. Mm-hmm. Prior to the filing of the city attorney's lawsuit in May of 2015, did CFPB personnel accompany Mr. Clark's investigators as they did the following? Conducted numerous interviews with former Wells Fargo employees, met with aggrieved victims, poured over public records, including court records from wrongful termination lawsuits by Wells Fargo. Did they?
So these investigations merged over time. What work we were doing, work the OCC was doing, work the LA did.
The investigation, did they not?
Well, they initiated their investigation.
Yeah.
We initiated our own efforts in our office.
After they?
No, we first heard about these problems in mid-2013 through whistleblower tips. The LA Times investigative series confirmed that there were issues in this industry. Now, there were different kinds of issues, and we were looking at financial incentive programs on a number of fronts at that time. We were dealing with credit card add-on deceptive marketing actions, which got back billions of dollars for consumers. We were looking at it in debt collection, where we ended up having the largest enforcement action ever against debt buyers and debt sellers.
Wells Fargo and other banks?
We've been looking at these problems in all of the banks and non-bank financial companies. There's been, believe me, there's been a lot of problems to look at and a lot of problems to deal with. This is a fairly major one, and there have been other major ones. Credit card add-on products has led to billions of dollars in relief for consumers.
Is there anything that the Bureau has learned from working, or the work that the LA City Attorney's Office did? Have you learned anything there?
So I think we learned from their investigation, and they learned from our investigation. They were able to take, I don't want to speak too much what other people did here, and I don't know that it matters. I don't know that we don't sit around as partners and think about what percentage of the credit we should allocate to one another. We're looking to get a good result for consumers, and together we did that here. But they conducted various parts of the investigation. The OCC has conducted various parts of the investigation. We've conducted various parts of the investigation. We've been able to take this and turn it into a nationwide relief for consumers, which the LA City Attorney's Office is unable to do under California law. And we in the OCC going forward will be active in working to clean it up here and across the industry. And let me say something specific here about whistleblower tips. We are getting a large and increasing number of whistleblower tips all the time. When a bank like Wells Fargo here does not come forward quickly with the problem that they recognize is occurring at their bank, they should not assume that we're not hearing about it from employees or customers or others. We probably are. So it makes sense for them to come forward more quickly and to self-report. That was not done here. It was a very late contact from Wells Fargo on this problem, as I see it.
Thank you. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here and for your public service, all of you. Following up on the self-report, Mr. Cordray, are banks required to report to you when they uncover fraud against customers in their own banks?
We think it is by far the best practice, and I know that the comptroller would agree, and we see eye to eye on this. We believe that compliance at a bank starts with the bank. They shouldn't expect us to come along and make sure they're complying with the law. They have that responsibility in the first instance to do it themselves, and our job is to make sure that they're doing it.
But no legal requirement? They have no legal requirement?
There's no legal requirement for them to report a problem, but they're in more trouble when they don't.
I understand. Mr. Curry, well, for all three of you, sorry, Mr. Curry, your testimony states your agency started to receive customer and employee complaints about improper sales practices in early 2012. Mr. Cordray, your letter says your agency first learned about this from whistleblowers in mid-2013. You both heard Mr. Stumpf's answer to my question. I assume you were watching. You both heard Mr. Stumpf's answer to my question about when he learned. What does that say about the bank's governance and priorities, Mr. Curry, if you'd start with that?
Sure. Our supervisory activity really has focused historically, and this goes back to 2012, really on the adequacy of their operational risk and compliance risk management systems. There have been, and as our written testimony indicates, there have been repeated issues with the sufficiency of those systems and those controls. So this has been an ongoing issue. I think the sales practices issues that have been uncovered by the three agencies represented on this table are really a manifestation of the overall weaknesses in their risk management, particularly in the compliance area.
I remember a discussion we had soon, I believe, after you took this position, about the importance of a risk officer in a bank and the role they should play, and as you pointed out, some do it better than others. Mr. Curry, as part of OCC's supervisory activities that began in 2013, you would have been meeting with executives, and my understanding you would meet regularly with the bank's board, correct?
Our teams meet regularly with management and with the boards of directors, particularly the independent members of the board.
Those not Mr. Stumpf, those that are not
independent
employees
from
of the
operating management.
And we just checked the employee the compensation of board members ranges from the, I believe, high 290s up into the $400,000 a year. Again, making the contrast of the 90% of the employees who lost their jobs through various reasons, but acts they committed we're not managers. We're making under $35,000 or $40,000 a year. What does it strain credibility that neither the board nor Mr. Stumpf really knew this was going on, as it sounded like from the testimony today?
I don't know, I have personal knowledge what they knew or didn't know, but I think our focus is in making sure that they have structures in place that facilitate the flow of important information about deficiencies in complaint processing structure or in terms of escalating issues that arise in the compliance function or in the ordinary business of the bank.
And I found, thank you, I found it particularly telling, and then Mr. Clark, I'd like your comments just on this whole area, telling that Mr. Stumpf said he met pretty much weekly, sometimes more often, with Ms. Tolstedt, and these issues apparently never came up until he learned about them in 2013, in part from the 3 regulators. Mr. Clark, your thoughts, or 3 government agencies. Mr. Clark.
We don't know precisely, Senator Brown, exactly what they knew and when they knew it. But I think as a longtime trial lawyer, one can draw inferences like courts and lawyers do. And it's difficult to believe, based on the information we developed in our investigation, and both before and after we filed our complaint, that the knowledge of this didn't extend far beyond the regional manager level.
Okay, two more real quick questions, Mr. Curry and more from Mr. Cordray. Your agencies have the authority to make criminal referrals. Have you done so in this case, or is there anything you can tell us about actions in that way? Both of you answer that, and then one more question.
Generally, our position is to cooperate with criminal law enforcement. Our focus now, at the conclusion of our supervisory activity, is really to look at the civil enforcement remedies we have at our disposal. That would be personal cease and desist orders, civil money penalties against individuals, or removal or prohibition from banking, which would prohibit someone from serving in any capacity at a bank. That process is ongoing now.
Mr. Cordray, comments?
So I've been told that I should not publicly acknowledge whether we've made criminal referrals or not. I think about this question. I thought there's something I think I can do without getting in trouble, which is quote our statute, 12 U.S.C. 5566. It says, if the Bureau obtains evidence that any person, domestic or foreign, is engaged in conduct that may constitute a violation of federal criminal law, the Bureau shall transmit such evidence to the Attorney General of the United States, who may institute criminal proceedings under appropriate law. We follow that statute to the letter.
Okay. Mr. Cordray, last question. I mentioned that a group of Wells Fargo customers sought compensation for their fraudulent accounts in 2013, even before the LA Times series was published. Rather than accepting responsibility, Wells Fargo forced them into arbitration, effectively preventing them from being made whole. How would the CFPB's arbitration rule have helped Wells customers in that case?
You know, I'm not familiar with all the lawsuits, but my understanding is that these financial products typically did carry an arbitration clause. When that happens, as happened here, when there's massive wrongdoing on a wide scale, but small amounts of harm to individual consumers, it will be very difficult to get any relief other than through a class action. And yet, I believe an arbitration clause here might well defeat a class action. I think that's going to be litigated here, and courts will decide it. But they've often decided that it bars relief on an individual scale through a class action mechanism.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Clark, you and your colleagues did a superb job. Looking back, when you filed your complaint, were you anticipating extended litigation, or was Wells Fargo cooperative from the very beginning about recognizing this problem and settling?
It was interesting, Senator Reed. In the initial response the day after we filed, they said something to the effect that we don't give our customers any accounts or services or products they don't need. They didn't say, in response to our complaint, we didn't give Wells Fargo customers anything they didn't ask for. That was pretty telling to us. We negotiated with Wells over a period of time. Ultimately, we were joined by our partners here before those negotiations were complete. But at the end, I think they cooperated in the sense that we ended up with what we believe to be a very robust series of reforms, the largest penalty in the history of our office. And because of the cooperation and working together with the other agencies here, those reforms and practice changes are nationwide.
With respect to the negotiations, would you, your view that the added weight of OCC and CFPB made a decisive difference in terms of the outcome as well as the speed?
I can't be sure of that, Senator, but I really believe that to be the case.
Thank you. There's one other aspect, too, of your testimony. You said that Wells Fargo made it difficult, if not impossible, for customers to receive accurate and clear information as to how accounts had been opened up in a consent, which suggests, to me at least, it wasn't just the individual, quote, bad apple, but it was larger than that. Is it your sense that there was some type of either deliberate or negligent sort of treatment of customers that contributed to this and is liable for at the company level?
Yes, I do, Senator, in this sense, that customers would go into Wells Fargo's branches, would ask about accounts, they got their statements either electronically or in paper, couldn't figure out what was going on, and they just couldn't get clear answers. And because the practices were improper, in our view, the Wells employees, in the experience of our witnesses, were not willing to come forward, and they didn't really give them honest answers. Sometimes, as I said in my oral testimony here, accounts were asked to be closed, they were supposed to be closed, and they weren't closed.
Thank you. Mr. Curry, you point out that, you know, culture is key in any organization, and I think that's obvious. It seems that for years, the culture at Wells Fargo was profit rather than customer satisfaction and customer service. Do you think that's changed, or is that an accurate view of what's happening recently?
I think this episode indicates how important it is, in fact. I think, you know, what we're looking for as a supervisor is to make sure that the institutions have a full understanding of the importance of culture, the reputational risk that, and the financial consequences that can flow when you lose that reputation or engage in activity that calls into question the culture of the institution. And again, our focus is making sure that they have the appropriate oversight structure, incentives. Incentive programs are compensation programs are something that we look at very closely in our heightened standards program, because it does guide and dictate the culture of the institution.
One of the impressions that emerges, I think, not just myself, but across a wide spectrum of opinion, is that the company might have been whispering about ethical standards and treating the customer right, but they were shouting about, this is the way you make money, sell more of these. Is that fair?
I think that's possible, yes.
Director Cordray, the CFPB has been engaged in this effort, and again, with your partnership, I think done an outstanding job. Your protection of consumer laws is something that you are expert in. Working with the comptroller, working with the City of Los Angeles, you brought special expertise. Can you, describe the special expertise you brought to the issue?
Yeah, I think we all bring a different expertise to this. I mean, the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office is working purely from an enforcement perspective. They brought a lawsuit. They are familiar with local conditions, which is tremendously valuable as we partner across the country, often with state attorneys general or with state banking regulators, in some cases with local officials who are forward-leaning on consumer issues like the LA City Attorney's Office. The OCC brings its deep knowledge of safety and soundness regulation at the institutions, and under this comptroller, I will say, an increasing attention and focus on consumer compliance and how safety and soundness actually affects the individual consumer, which has been a point of a collaboration with the Bureau. I think what we bring to this is we bring both unique ability to engage not only in supervisory but also enforcement activity, and we do both frequently. The fact that we have separate laws that we can enforce here, including identifying abusive practices, which is alone an authority granted to this agency, that we also bring a consumer-focused perspective and market analysis and expertise, and the ability to use our CID power aggressively, even outside the scope of a lawsuit, in order to get information and process that information. And I think we brought those tools to the table. Each of these other teams brought their tools to the table. Together, it makes for a strong result. If you look back at our enforcement actions over our 5 years, many of them have been done with partners. Many of them, I can tell you, almost all of them have been more effective for doing that. Sometimes it takes a little longer because working back and forth with other offices takes certain procedures and other things to get into place. But it is always the best answer if we can do it well, and people did it well here.
Thank you very much.
Soon I can do Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your service and the work that you've done here. And Director Cordray, the subject of today's hearing is, in my mind, the ultimate affirmation of your agency and its employees. In the wake of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when unfair and abusive practices ran rampant in the industry, I know that as a member of the committee at the time, one of the things that I wanted to ensure that we did in the Wall Street reform legislation, and to fight tooth and nail to get it, is to empower a cop on the beat, so that would be on the side of consumers. And I must say, you as the director and your bureau and agency have lived up to every bit of those expectations from my point of view. Now, I hope to use this as a teaching moment for some of my colleagues that aren't aware of the Bureau's latest list of accomplishments. I'd point out that since its creation in 2011, the Bureau has recovered and sent back nearly $12 billion to 27 million consumers harmed by illegal practices of credit card companies, banks, debt collectors, mortgage lenders, and others. 12 billion to 27 million consumers. And it's amazing that despite all of those accomplishments, my Republican colleagues are hell-bent on killing this agency. Just 3 legislative days after the announcement of the settlement of Wells Fargo, one of my Republican colleagues introduced, and the majority leader, Senator McConnell, fast-tracked a bill that would fundamentally alter the funding mechanism for the Bureau and subject it to the annual appropriation process. So in view of that, can you tell me, Director, what would it mean for the Bureau to be subject to the annual appropriations process vis-a-vis the work that you do?
Let me start in a general sense, which is what we can see here is there's a very big job to be done to change the culture and practices at the banks. It doesn't happen overnight. This is on top of the robo-signing mortgage servicing scandal. It's on top of the mortgage origination scandals that led to the financial crisis. It will take considerable time for us to root out all of these things in the financial institutions, banks as well as non-banks. But if we can remain on the job, if we can continue to exert our authorities in matters like this, if we can continue to work with our partners across the country, we will continue to make progress.
I appreciate that. What happens if you put on the annual appropriation process?
Well, it would compromise our independence and make it harder for us to do our job,
now,
just as it is for all the banking agencies.
If the bill were to become law, and trust me when I tell you that we won't let it, how might it undermine the Bureau's efforts to protect consumers from unfair, deceptive, and abusive practices?
Again, anything that is attempting or seeking, and some of these efforts are, to compromise our independence will make it harder for us to do our job.
Now, let me ask all 3 of you, do any of you disagree, and if so, please explain to me why, that in essence here at Wells Fargo, what we had was a pressure cooker environment with perverse incentives and a culture that ultimately led to the type of wrongdoing that took place? Does anybody disagree with that view?
Not at all.
No.
Okay.
In fact, they sent mixed messages at best if they countervailed that culture at all.
Now, Mr. Curry, let me ask you, do you believe that you, meaning the Controller's Office, should have been notified earlier than what you were notified by Wells Fargo?
I think it's critically important that there be open and frank disclosure of relevant information by a bank with our examiners. It's not entirely clear at what point that occurred here. And
is it fair to say that this is a material, what happened here is a material event as it relates to the bank?
I think there's always difficulty when you try to define a term like material depending on the context. I would say from the OCC standpoint and the facts of this particular case, the fact that 5,300 employees were terminated was material, and that there were 2 million accounts involved, that would be material.
Let me ask you, did you, go ahead, Director Cordray.
There was something in the earlier testimony that bothered me, which was an acknowledgement that the bank alerted the OCC in 2013, but did not alert the CFPB until 2015. We had known about these types of problems from our own sources, but if any institution feels that they can divide and conquer among the regulators, they should know that that is a mistake.
Let me ask you this. How widespread is the issue of cross-selling, at least in the perverse way that it took place at Wells Fargo? Do you have any sense whether this is a one-off or is this an industry-wide concern?
I think our view is, and I mentioned this in my testimony, what we generally look at incentive compensation at an institution in general. With what we've seen here at Wells Fargo, I have directed that we are to do a horizontal review, so we will be looking specifically at sales practices at our largest banks and mid-sized banks.
I look forward to
agree with the comptroller on that. We'll be doing joint action on that. I would say the incentive compensation has been a problem we've seen across a number of different markets, so it is a broader issue. As to cross-selling, Wells Fargo Bank no doubt was the industry leader in aggressively cross-selling products, which led in part to the extreme circumstances we find here. But to the extent others are engaged in it, you should be focused on customer satisfaction, not on bare numbers, and there are monitoring systems that can be put in place. I agree with something the comptroller said earlier, which is we're all going to go back on this and think more about what we can do to make sure that the cultures are changing at these banks. And we need to do some rethinking ourselves and, as always, learn from new events.
Lastly, to Mr. Curry and then Mr. Clark, in reading the OCC's consent order, I'm struck by the group of orders attempting to remedy what appears to be a long-standing gross deficiency in the bank's risk management, governance structure, and oversight protocols. For an institution with $1.85 trillion in total consolidated assets, I'm incredibly concerned about the bank's ability to identify and manage risks across its various lines of business. At what point do you think Wells Fargo executives should have been aware of these deficiencies, and how far back do you think these risk management deficiencies go? And then separately for you, Mr. Clark, and I'd like to hear both your answers and I'll rest there. I read with interest the complaint that your office filed where you said, the complaint says, managers consistently hound, berate, demean, threaten employees to meet these unreachable quotas. And where you talked about Wells Fargo gaming practice of targeting individuals holding Mexican consulate cards, I assume that when you made those assertions, they are based upon factual evidence that you discovered in the course of your investigation. Mr. Curry, could you speak to what I asked you and Mr. Clark to you?
Yeah, I think our testimony, which discusses our supervisory history, demonstrates that there has been a significant period where we've identified weaknesses in their operational risk and compliance risk management. What we've attempted to do with Wells Fargo is really to address those weaknesses that have been identified through our matters requiring attention. That was escalated after we conducted our heightened standards review to be a Part 30 compliance plan, which is an enforceable requirement under our safety and soundness guidelines, and ultimately the weaknesses that we saw in their safety and soundness program resulted in the enforcement order that we had, and that is a significant and major tool at our disposal for institutional weaknesses in their programs.
Senator Menendez, let me answer your second question first, and that is we based our allegations on 16 months worth of work. It was public documents, witness interviews, former employees, every source we could come to, again, lacking pre-indictment or pre-filing subpoena power. As to how early they could have known, some of the documents we looked at were wrongful termination lawsuits. And they described this kind of conduct, for example, in St. Helena, which is part of our Napa Valley wine country, as early as 2009.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So buried in the fine print of Wells Fargo's checking and credit card contracts is a forced arbitration clause. It says that if a customer has any dispute with the bank about anything related to that checking account or that credit card, then they cannot go to court and they cannot join with other customers who have the same problem. Instead, They have to go one by one through arbitration. Now, a feature of arbitration that the banks particularly love is that it's nearly always all secret. Filings and documents aren't available, and even if the customer wins, there's no public record of it like there would be if we were in a court case. Director Cordray, do you think forced arbitration clauses make it easier for big banks to cover up patterns of abusive conduct, including the years of misconduct by Wells Fargo in this case?
I do think so, yes.
So, in other words, these forced arbitration clauses make it easier for Wells to get away with scamming their customers, which is why it is good news for customers that the CFPB has proposed strong new rules that would ban forced arbitration clauses that prevent customers from joining together to bring a public action in court. And I think this is just one more way. We're talking here about the CFPB's enforcement division, which I'm very glad that we're doing, and that's powerfully important. But you get better rules in place, and this kind of fraud gets exposed much earlier. If we'd had class actions on this back in 2010, 2009, 2008, then the problem never would have gotten so out of hand. So I think that's really important. Please.
There's another sort of somewhat related indicator here that shows you the focus on these things. One of the first things that Wells Fargo did in the LA City action that was brought was aggressively seek a protective order to keep the proceedings as much as possible from public view.
That's right, trying to keep it all secret, and that's what the arbitration clause does, that they put in these contracts, everything out of public view for as long as humanly possible. You know, I also want to hit another point about how you make structural change, because I think that's so important here. And Mr. Clark, I want to thank you for your testimony today and for the great work that your office has undertaken in this case.
Thank you, Senator.
One of the really powerful things that the CFPB has done is to create a new complaint hotline, which allows customers to register complaints against any financial product. And we'll just put in the record. You can go to cfpb.gov and file a complaint online, right? Anyone can do this. And since its inception, the agency has fielded nearly 1 million complaints. Is that right, Director Cordray?
It's going to be 1 million later this week.
All right,
so
we're almost there. We'll have to have we'll have to mark the occasion.
I think Thursday. So.
And one of the best parts about this is not just that you fielded the complaints, it's that you made them public and you made them searchable online. And that allows everyone from researchers and academics to law enforcement authorities to the banks themselves to be able to spot growing problems and then to address them. So, Mr. Clark, I wanted to ask, in the process of conducting your investigation into Wells Fargo, did you use the CFPB's complaint database?
Yes, we did.
Good, and it was helpful to you?
Very helpful, as was the FTC Sentinel database.
Excellent. I'm very glad to hear that. You know, this is yet another way that the consumer agency is protecting customers and holding banks accountable. It's bringing a lot more transparency to the market, which helps identify banks that are consistently harming their customers. And just as important, it rewards the banks that are doing a good job for their customers. You know, there must be a lot of community bank presidents who are standing by watching this hearing saying, we don't engage in this kind of behavior. You won't find those kind of complaints against us in the CFPB database. Move your accounts over where you can actually trust your banker. In light of all of the great CFPB work in investigating this case and everyone working together on this, from the arbitration rule to the complaint database, to stop this kind of scam from happening again, because that's the part we really want to make sure we focus on. I think you're sending a very loud message to the banks that, and a loud message to my Republican colleagues who continue to attack the agency. You know, Wells Fargo may wish that the CFPB would disappear, and some Republicans may keep trying to leash up this watchdog, but that's not going to happen. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Merkley.
Thank you. Earlier I mentioned several of the features that came out of interviews with employees of the high-pressure environment, employees who were given daily quotas for, quote, daily solutions, that is sales of accounts, that they had to stay late or coming on weekends if they didn't meet them, high-pressure sales meetings, bonuses that were tied to meeting those the threats of being put on probation or being fired because they did not meet those quotas. In some cases, managers conducting coaching sessions on how to meet the quotas through creating these accounts, regional sales meetings conducted on an hourly basis to keep checking in. In this whole structure that was established in the Wells Fargo culture of how to do intensity cross sales, was this a high-pressure sales culture for the people who were the personal bankers and the tellers? Just each of you, your opinion on that.
Yes, I think that's really what we were addressing in our supervisory letter from June of 2015. Those were all deficiencies.
Thank you. Do both of you agree with that?
Yeah, if I could just elaborate. It was excruciatingly high pressure in various settings. When you first start to hear about something like this, it takes some time to untangle conflicting accounts, and there's different pieces of this. There were some different angles on it. One issue was whether employees themselves were being abused, and that was part of the complaints that people were seeing. Another issue was whether they were pressuring consumers to open accounts, ultimately getting their consent, but pressuring them into improper or not suitable accounts. And then the third, which sort of emerged a little later, was that potentially they were just opening accounts without consumers even knowing about it. It's the third thing we're focusing on here, but it takes some time to bring this into focus as you conduct an investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Director Cordray described it as excruciatingly high pressure. Does that fit your impression?
It does, Senator. Let me tell you a quick anecdote. I'm a Wells Fargo customer. I was in my bank on Friday doing a transaction. The senior person there recognized me, asked me about this, and said, "You can't believe, Jim, what the pressure was like. It was excruciating. I'm so glad I'm out of that now because I'm in a different kind of bank." This was on Friday, and he told me this. I found that extraordinary, Senator.
So just a few moments ago, when I was asking the CEO of Wells Fargo about the establishment of this high-pressure situation that left bank tellers and personal bankers in a no-win, between a rock and a hard place position, he denied that there was any such structure. Is that completely inconsistent with your complete understanding of this situation?
Senator, again, I'd go back to our June 2015 supervisory letter in which we found that the program was deficient.
And Mr. Curry, that's a nice way of saying yes. Yes, okay.
It does differ from my understanding of the situation that we found in our investigation.
So why, after this extensive public review of the establishment of this high-pressure culture, why would the CEO, after working with you all and having these various letters and so forth, after paying a fine, come in here and say no such thing existed? These were just individual employees who had ethical lapses. Why possibly did we hear that testimony today?
I don't know. I don't know either, Senator.
Any insight, Mr. Curry?
No, it's inconsistent with our findings.
Okay, it's inconsistent with everything. Is it because the bank is trying to insulate itself from lawsuits?
I wouldn't speculate. I don't know.
Is it possibly because the top executives who are in charge during this whole period want to have kind of no responsibility, claim no responsibility, and instead it's just those 5,000 low-level people who had nothing to do with the system they set up to sell?
I think there is responsibility here, that we have a consent order with the OCC, with the CFPB, and with the City of Los Angeles.
I'd like to enter into the record Banking on the Hard Sell article from the National Employment Law Project.
Without objection.
It lays out these high-pressure cultures that have happened in many financial retail banking groups. I think when the question was asked earlier, Mr. Curry, you noted that that's something you'll horizontally be looking into. But do any of you have some impression based on what you've seen so far that these practices, that at least maybe not to the same degree, but these high sale practices, high pressure practices did result in similar creation of fake accounts or adding things to customers they didn't ask for?
That's really will be the focus of our horizontal review. Banks are under enormous margin pressure, and that could be a bad
that could be the case.
I'll just say that, for example, we started with our first deceptive marketing of credit card add-on enforcement action, many of which we took jointly with the OCC. That mushroomed into 12 eventually across the industry. It was worth billions of dollars. We will certainly follow up as aggressively here.
I've had the experience of opening an account in partnership with going to the bank with my daughter, and it was very clearly, we went through, this is a no-fee account for a student, right? Yes, right. Then the paperwork comes, and it's a fee account. And I had another case where I opened an account, and I said, I don't want the overdraft protection or the fee that goes with that. I want the free account. Yes, absolutely. Got the paperwork. Funny thing, I had the fee account. And I just thought it was sloppy paperwork. I had no idea until now that there was a hard sell system of quotas that was causing folks to basically slam me with stuff that I had explicitly said I didn't want. And that was not at Wells Fargo, so I'll just say that I suspect that you'll find lots of this activity elsewhere. Turning to Sarbanes-Oxley, where a CEO must sign off on the sufficiency of internal audits. Clearly from this hearing, the conduct was relevant to a bank's reputation and therefore to its certainly of material interest to its investors. Should the SEC launch an investigation of this in terms of those Sarbanes-Oxley reports?
I'll leave that to the SEC.
Okay. And finally, in the settlement, Wells Fargo was allowed to neither admit nor deny wrongdoing. And we heard today the result. The head of the bank comes in here and said, we didn't do anything. It's just a bunch of bad apples who were ethically misguided. And it bothers me. Was that debated and wrestled with? And why was Wells Fargo allowed to not admit wrongdoing?
So here's my point of view on that, Senator. The order speaks for itself. It is very detailed. It tells the facts as we established them through our investigation. That is the story. People can quibble with it if they want, but that is the story, and it is the story that is forming vigorous public scrutiny going forward and potentially other investigation by other public officials, which we will be welcoming and assisting any way we can.
Doesn't it make it harder, though, to hold the managers accountable to the board of directors of a company when they haven't admitted any wrongdoing?
I think actions speak louder than words. The notion that nothing happened here, but they fired 5,300 people, those things cannot possibly be squared.
I also think, Senator, that we wanted to get relief to consumers as quickly as we could. It's very typical. I practiced law at a big law firm for 35 years for these non-admissions to be part of an agreement. It would have taken years to litigate this case, at least from our perspective, and we wouldn't have gotten relief for consumers. We thought the consumers needed to get relief now, and the practices had to stop. And so that's one reason from our perspective went that way.
I do applaud all of that, but I've got to say, from the men and women on the street perspective, it's enormously frustrating to see the people at the bottom be fired from their jobs, be threatened with firing, forced in an untenable situation, and see the managers take no responsibility. They take their bonuses, they aren't clawed back, they keep their jobs. Let me take, and I'll just close with this, Mr. Chairman. The manager of this unit who worked to establish this very successful, I say successful from the cross-selling profitability system that produced these fraudulent activities, is walking away. You can call it a bonus, or you can call it a platinum parachute, or you can call it money she's already earned, which is what we've heard. But more than $100 million, not counting what came previously. It would take a bank worker earning $25,000 a year And that's roughly in the ballpark, because a lot of these workers were paid $11 to $12 an hour. $25,000, it would take them 4,000 years to earn that $100 million. 4,000 years, or to put it differently, 100 lifetimes working 40 years. It's phenomenal distinction, and that managers are taking home those kinds of profits from developing a system that destroyed so many consumers and affected so many of their own employees by putting them in an impossible situation. It is wrong, it is ugly, it is criminal. There should be accountability for the managers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Murphy. We appreciate your appearance today. It's been a lengthy hearing. I think maybe this is the beginning of a lot of things, but a lot of us are worried about that perhaps there's similar doings going on in other banks. We hope not. Because I've said from the beginning, banking should be based on integrity, on trust. I think you would agree with me on that.
We do.
And most banks have that, but some don't. Thank you. Committee is adjourned.
Sure, Brown. Thank you for working with us so well with our office. Big fan of yours. Thank you. It's mutual. I've seen what you've done. I have a lot of clerks in my family. One's with ease and one's without ease. Ease are British. Yes, it's not well ease or Scottish. Is that right? Thank you for your time. Thanks always. Your work is always terrific. I was just saying, anybody who's ever seen us that are good for that. It's like, all them were bad. He's good. I just need to get soon. Yeah, but I appreciate you. Thank you. Thanks, man. Stay in touch.
Did you want to take a question on executive compensation rule? Sure. What's the report? And this is before you would
It's very nice to meet you.
I read you, but it's nice to see you in person.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So I wanted to ask about the executive.
Thank you. How you doing? Come out here. Claw back. That was just that
And the Senate Banking Committee wrapping up its hearing on Wells Fargo's business practices. We'll have this archived in the C-SPAN video library if you missed any of the hearing, or if you want to go back and watch portions again. One of those portions included questioning by Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts earlier, who said to Wells Fargo CEO John Stumpf, "You should resign, give back the money, and be criminally investigated." You can check out this part of the hearing with Senator Warren via the Twitter feed of C-SPAN's Craig Kaplan, and we'll be showing the hearing in its entirety in just a moment right here on C-SPAN 3.